My wife spent the night out with her male co-workers. She came back at 4 a.m. and whispered, "Don't ask." I didn't. But when she saw who was sitting in our living room the next morning, her jaw dropped. Look, I'm not going to sit here and pretend I was some kind of insomniac prophet who saw this coming from miles away. But let me tell you, when your wife stumbles through the front door at 4:03 in the morning looking like she just escaped from a perfume factory that exploded in a martini bar, you don't need a PhD in marital psychology to know something's rotten in the state of your bedroom. I wasn't asleep. Hell, I hadn't been asleep for about 3 hours at that point, and not because I was waiting up like some paranoid sitcom husband with trust issues and a drinking problem. No, I was wide awake because I'd already done the math, connected the dots, and basically solved this mystery faster than those nerds on CSI figure out who touched the doorknob. The click of the door was subtle, real subtle, like she thought she was some kind of ninja assassin who'd mastered the ancient art of not waking up her clueless husband. Spoiler alert, I heard everything. The fumbling with keys that sounded like she was trying to break into Fort Knox with a spoon, the whispered curse word when she dropped something, probably her dignity, and then that theatrical tiptoe across the hardwood floor like she was auditioning for a heist movie nobody asked for. I kept my eyes closed, played dead like a possum at a highway rest stop, and just listened to the symphony of bad choices unfolding in my living room. When she finally made it past the couch, which, by the way, is where I'd been posted up since midnight watching Kevin O'Leary tear apart some poor soul's cupcake business on Shark Tank reruns, I cracked one eye open just enough to catch the full picture. And brother, it was a Picasso of disaster. Mira had her heels dangling from one hand like trophies from a night she'd never admit to. Her blazer was half on and half off in a way that screamed, "I got dressed in an Uber." And her hair looked like it had been styled by a ceiling fan set to hurricane. But here's the kicker, the real chef's kiss of this whole production. She was whispering to herself. Actually whispering the words, "Don't ask," like she was rehearsing her defense strategy or practicing some kind of reverse psychology magic spell that would wipe my memory clean. "Don't ask." That's what she muttered as she floated past me. And I'm using the word floated generously here because it was more like a drunk penguin trying to ice skate uphill. She thought I was asleep. She genuinely believed I'd just snore through this Oscar-worthy performance like I always did. Like some oblivious husband character from a bad rom-com who doesn't notice his wife coming home smelling like a cologne convention had a baby with a liquor cabinet. But here's the thing about assumptions. They make an ass out of you and, well, just you in this case, Mira. The smell hit me before she even made it to the hallway. Now, I'm not some bloodhound with a supernatural sense of smell or anything, but when your wife comes home reeking of expensive cologne that definitely doesn't come from the discount rack at Target where I buy my deodorant, you notice. This wasn't her usual scent, that vanilla lavender combo she'd worn since we got married, the one that smelled like responsible adulting and Sunday morning pancakes. No, this was something with notes of, I make six figures, and I definitely own a yacht, or at least know someone who does. It was the kind of cologne that comes in a bottle shaped like a geometric nightmare and costs more than my car payment. And I definitely, absolutely, 100% did not own anything that smelled like that. I watched her disappear down the hallway toward our bedroom, moving with the confidence of someone who thinks they've pulled off the perfect crime. She probably figured she'd shower, climb into bed, and tomorrow morning we'd do our usual dance of me asking, "How was your night?" and her responding with some vague corporate word salad about networking events and team bonding exercises that sounded more like euphemisms from a very specific genre of late-night cable programming. She'd gotten away with it before, or at least she thought she had. All those late nights at the office, those weekend team-building retreats that somehow never included spouses, those emergency conference calls at 9 p.m. on a Friday that apparently required her to leave the house fully made up with heels and that dress she saved for special occasions. But here's what Mira didn't know, couldn't have known, because she was too busy living in her little bubble of terrible decisions and worse excuses. I'd been awake for hours. Not just tonight, but metaphorically, you know? Like, I'd woken up from this whole marriage coma about 2 weeks ago when I found a receipt in her jacket pocket from some restaurant I'd never heard of, the Velvet Spoon, which sounds less like a place where people eat dinner and more like a location where murders happen in mystery novels. The receipt was for 2 entrees, 2 desserts, and a bottle of wine that cost more than our first date second date, and third date combined. And before you ask, no, I wasn't invited to this little culinary adventure. I was at home that night eating leftover Chinese food and watching a documentary about penguins, ironically enough. So yeah, I'd been doing my homework. I'd been paying attention to the patterns, the little inconsistencies in her stories, the way she'd started password protecting her phone like it contained nuclear launch codes, the mysterious work trips that seemed to coincide with her boss's schedule. I wasn't some jealous psycho tracking her every move. I was just a guy who'd finally decided to trust his gut instead of the woman who used to be my best friend before she became a stranger who shared my mortgage. Don't ask, she'd said, like those two words were some kind of magical incantation that would make me forget how to think critically or notice obvious red flags the size of Texas. Don't ask where you were. Don't ask who you were with. Don't ask why you smell like a Sephora exploded in a gentleman's club. Just don't ask, and we can all pretend everything's fine. That our marriage isn't slowly turning into one of those true crime podcasts where everyone listening at home is screaming at the husband to wake up and smell the infidelity. Well, joke's on her, because I wasn't planning to ask. Asking would require me to pretend I didn't already know the answer, and I'm way too tired for that level of performance art. Asking would give her the opportunity to lie to my face again, to spin some elaborate tale about how Brent from accounting just needed someone to talk to about his divorce, and they lost track of time and whoops, didn't realize it was 4 a.m. Asking would ruin the surprise I had planned, the beautiful, carefully orchestrated karma bomb I'd been assembling in my head, while Mr. Wonderful told some entrepreneur that their business model was dead on arrival. No, I wasn't going to ask her anything. I was just going to sit here in the dark, on my couch, in my house, sipping my cold coffee and mentally drafting the exit strategy that would make Sun Tzu look like an amateur. Because if there's one thing I learned from 17 seasons of Shark Tank, it's that you need to know when to cut your losses and walk away from a bad investment. And brother, this marriage had become the worst investment of my life. No returns, terrible partners, an evaluation that kept dropping faster than my self-respect every time she walked through that door smelling like someone else's life. I listened to the shower turn on, because of course she needed to wash away the evidence like some criminal mastermind who learned everything she knows from watching How to Get Away with Murder. I imagined her standing under the hot water, probably feeling relieved that she'd made it home without confrontation, without consequences, without having to face the music that was about to drop like a beat at a rave she definitely wasn't invited to. Don't ask, I whispered to myself in the dark, mimicking her voice. Don't ask, I repeated, and then I smiled. Not a happy smile, but that cold, calculated smile you get when you realize you're about to win a game the other person doesn't even know they're playing. Because tomorrow was going to be very, very interesting. Tomorrow, I was going to start making phone calls. Tomorrow, the fun would really begin. And Mira, sweet, careless, cologne-soaked Mira, had absolutely no idea what was coming. By 7 a.m, I was sitting at our kitchen table. Well, technically it's still our table, but let's be honest. After last night's performance, I was already mentally dividing assets in my head like some divorce attorney who charges $400 an hour, drinking black coffee. Not the fancy kind with oat milk and caramel drizzle and whatever other Instagram-worthy garbage people pretend tastes good. No, I'm talking straight-up black coffee. No sugar, no cream, just pure bitter darkness that matched my mood and my newfound clarity about this absolute dumpster fire of a marriage. If coffee could talk, this cup would have been giving me a standing ovation for finally waking up and smelling the betrayal. Mira was still sleeping in, which is married person code for hiding under the covers and hoping yesterday's terrible decisions somehow evaporated overnight like they were written in disappearing ink. I could hear her phone buzzing from the bedroom every few minutes. Probably Brent checking in to make sure his little secret was still safe. Probably sending some cowardly text like, did he suspect anything? Or, we should probably cool it for a while, like they were teenagers sneaking around behind the bleachers instead of grown adults torching a marriage with the emotional intelligence of houseplants. The house itself was basically screaming evidence at me louder than a prosecutor on one of those courtroom TV shows my mom watches religiously. I'm talking about clues so obvious that even Scooby-Doo could have solved this mystery without Velma's help, and that dog survives on literal snacks and cowardice. First up, 2 wine glasses in the sink. Now, Before you jump in with, maybe she had a friend over, let me stop you right there, because Mira doesn't have friends who visit at midnight on a Tuesday. Her friends are all married with kids and mortgages and bedtimes that would make senior citizens look like party animals. These glasses still had lipstick on the rim. One shade I recognized as hers. That mauve color she bought from Sephora and won't shut up about. And another shade that definitely wasn't from any makeup bag in this house. Strike one. Then there was the missing phone charger situation. See, we've got this basket on the kitchen counter where we keep all our charging cables because Myra's one of those organizationally obsessed people who labels everything like we're running a small business out of our living room instead of just, living. Her work laptop charger was there. Her iPad cable was there. But her iPhone charger, the white Apple one she guards with her life because she claims the off-brand ones ruin the battery, even though I've tried explaining that's not how electricity works, was gone. Vanished. Probably sitting on some nightstand that isn't mine, charging next to a phone that's been texting my wife messages I'm definitely not supposed to see. And the perfume. Oh man, the perfume. I'm not exaggerating when I say you could have fumigated a small moose with the amount of scent lingering in our entryway. It was everywhere, on the coat rack, hovering near the couch, probably embedded in the carpet fibers like some kind of aromatic crime scene evidence. This wasn't her usual smell, and it definitely wasn't mine unless I'd suddenly started moonlighting as a cologne model who shops exclusively at stores where they greet you with champagne. This was expensive. This was deliberate. This was the olfactory equivalent of a signed confession. But here's where it gets really good, folks, where my inner detective decided to upgrade from suspicious husband to forensic accountant with a vendetta. I opened our shared banking app because nothing says healthy marriage built on trust and communication quite like joint checking accounts and matching debit cards that track each other's spending habits like some dystopian surveillance system we willingly signed up for. I know, some of you are probably thinking that's an invasion of privacy, and you're absolutely right. Except we both agreed to this setup 3 years ago when Mira convinced me it would help us budget better and stay financially transparent. Well, transparency works both ways, sweetheart. I scrolled through yesterday's transactions with the dedication of an IRS agent who suspects tax fraud and really needs a win this quarter. Coffee at Starbucks, 7:15 in the morning. Okay, normal. Lunch at that salad place she loves because apparently eating leaves makes you morally superior. Fine, whatever. Gas station, 3:30 p.m., boring but necessary. And then, right there at 11:47 p.m., like a neon sign flashing, your wife is a lying liar who lies. A charge for $173 at a place called the Velvet Spoon. The Velvet Spoon. Let me paint you a picture of this establishment, because I looked it up immediately on Google like any self-respecting husband who's about to become single would do. This isn't some casual Applebee's where you go for half-price appetizers and questionable margaritas. This isn't even one of those mid-tier chain restaurants with the fake Italian names and the unlimited breadsticks. No, the Velvet Spoon is one of those upscale lounges downtown where the appetizers cost more than my weekly grocery budget and the drinks come with fancy ice cubes that are somehow artisanal. It's got mood lighting that's permanently stuck on romantic ambience, leather booths that have definitely seen some questionable decisions, and a menu that describes everything in French because apparently English isn't pretentious enough. According to Myra's previous explanations about this place, because yes, she's mentioned it before in her carefully constructed web of lies. This is where her male coworkers just hang out after projects to decompress and network. Just hang out. Just decompress. Just network. Right. And I just hang out at Ferrari dealerships on Saturday afternoons because I enjoy the free Wi-Fi and the leather smell, not because I'm fantasizing about a life where I can afford things that cost more than my kidneys are worth on the black market. $173. At midnight. On a Tuesday. For what exactly? Let me do the math here, because I've got nothing but time and spite fueling my calculations right now. That's probably 2 overpriced entrees at about $40 each. Maybe some appetizers because you can't just sit at a fancy restaurant without ordering the truffle fries or whatever gentrified nonsense they're pushing, and definitely a bottle of wine. Not a glass, a bottle, because nothing says purely professional relationship like sharing fermented grapes that cost more than most people's car insurance. I sat there staring at that transaction like it was some kind of abstract art I was trying to interpret, except the meaning was pretty damn clear and it wasn't open to subjective interpretation. My wife had spent almost $200 at a romantic restaurant at midnight with someone who wasn't me, then came home at 4 in the morning smelling like a cologne commercial and telling me not to ask questions. This wasn't rocket science. This wasn't even community college science. This was elementary school detective book level obvious. The best part? The transaction showed it was paid with our joint account. Not her personal credit card, not some secret stash of cash she'd been hiding. Our money. The money we both worked for. The money that was supposed to go toward our mortgage and our bills and our theoretical future together. She'd taken our shared funds and used them to finance her little romantic escapade like some kind of financial infidelity double whammy. It was almost impressive in its audacity, like watching someone rob a bank and then asking the teller for a receipt. I screenshot the transaction, saved it, backed it up to 3 different cloud services because I've seen enough TV shows to know that evidence has a way of mysteriously disappearing when you need it most. Then I opened up a new note on my phone and started documenting everything. The time she came home, the cologne smell, the wine glasses, the missing charger, the velvet spoon charge. I wrote it all down with the methodical precision of someone building a case, because that's exactly what I was doing. This wasn't anger. Well, okay, it was definitely anger, but it was organized anger. Strategic anger. The kind of anger that makes spreadsheets and takes notes and doesn't just flip tables like some reality TV star having a meltdown. From the bedroom, I heard movement. She was waking up, probably checking her phone, probably seeing texts from Brent or whoever else was involved in this circus. I could picture her lying there, rehearsing her story, preparing her excuses, maybe even convincing herself that she hadn't done anything wrong, that this was somehow my fault for not being attentive enough or exciting enough or whatever justification cheaters tell themselves to sleep at night. I poured myself another cup of coffee and smiled. Not a happy smile. I was way past happy at this point, but that cold, calculated smile you get when you're holding all the cards and the other players don't even know the game has started. Mira thought she was so clever, so careful, so good at covering her tracks. But she'd made one critical mistake. She'd underestimated me. She'd assumed I was the same oblivious husband I'd been for the past year. The guy who nodded and smiled and believed every word she said. But that guy? He died somewhere around 4:03 this morning. And the person sitting here drinking bitter coffee and screenshot banking transactions? He was someone new. Someone who was done being played. Someone who was about to flip this entire script and watch the dominoes fall exactly where he wanted them to. Game on, Mira. Game on. So here's the thing about rage. When it's fresh and hot, it makes you do stupid things like punch walls or send texts you can't take back or eat an entire pizza by yourself at 3 in the morning while crying to Adele songs. But when you let it simmer overnight, when you let it cool down and crystallize into something sharp and purposeful, that's when it becomes dangerous. That's when it becomes useful. And sitting there at my kitchen table with my second cup of nuclear-grade black coffee and a phone full of screenshots that could end a marriage faster than you can say irreconcilable differences, I was feeling pretty damn dangerous. I scrolled through my contacts like I was browsing a menu at a restaurant, except instead of picking between burgers and tacos, I was deciding whose life I wanted to ruin first. Okay, that sounds harsh. I wasn't trying to ruin anyone's life. I just wanted the truth. And maybe a little bit of satisfaction. And definitely the look on Brent's face when he realized he'd been caught with his hand in the cookie jar, except the cookie jar was my wife, and this metaphor was getting away from me, but you get the point. Brent Henderson, team lead Brent, as Mira always called him with this weird mixture of respect, and something else I couldn't quite identify, but now realized was probably attraction disguised as professional admiration. She talked about this guy constantly. Brent says we should pivot our strategy. Brent thinks I should lead the next presentation. Brent gave me really great feedback on my quarterly report. I'd heard the name Brent so many times in the past 6 months that I was starting to think she'd forgotten mine. And here's the kicker. She always described him as just a friend who gives great feedback. Like he was some kind of corporate life coach instead of what he actually was, which was apparently the guy she was staying out until 4 in the morning with while spending my money on overpriced wine. I found his number in my phone. Yeah, I had his number, because Mira had given it to me months ago in case of emergency. and I needed to reach her through work. The irony wasn't lost on me. This definitely qualified as an emergency, just not the kind she'd been thinking of when she programmed his contact info into my phone with a little briefcase emoji next to his name, like he was some kind of professional connection instead of a homewrecker in a button-down shirt. It was 8:30 in the morning, early enough that he'd be awake, but late enough that he couldn't claim he was still sleeping and couldn't talk. Perfect timing for an ambush, really. I hit the call button before I could overthink it, and listened to it ring once, twice, 3 times. For a second, I thought he might not answer. Maybe he'd seen my name on his caller ID and panicked. Maybe he was too busy deleting incriminating texts or Googling what to do when your affair partner's husband calls you. But then he picked up. Hello? His voice sounded rough, scratchy, like he'd gargled gravel for breakfast. Hungover. The man was definitely hungover, and somehow that made me smile because it meant last night had been exactly what I thought it was. Oh hey man, he continued when I didn't immediately respond, probably trying to sound casual and failing miserably. Mirror around. Like we were college roommates, and he was calling to see if his buddy could come out and play. Like he hadn't been out with her until 4 in the goddamn morning doing God knows what at a restaurant that probably has sommeliers and cloth napkins and waiters who describe the specials in voices that sound like they're narrating nature documentaries. I took a slow sip of my coffee, let the silence stretch out just long enough to make it uncomfortable. Nope, I said finally, keeping my voice light and friendly like we were talking about the weather or sports scores or anything other than the fact that he'd been playing hide the salami with my wife. But sounds like you two had fun at the Velvet Spoon. Dead silence. And I mean dead. Like, if silence could die and then have a funeral and then be buried 6 feet under. That's how dead this silence was. I could literally hear him stop breathing on the other end of the line. Could practically hear his brain short-circuiting as it tried to compute how I knew about the restaurant, what else I knew, whether he should confess or deny, or just hang up and change his name and move to Canada where my jurisdiction presumably didn't reach. You could hear his soul buffering, like watching a computer try to load a program that's too big for its processor, just that spinning wheel of death going round and round while everything freezes. It was beautiful, honestly. If I could have bottled that silence and sold it, I could have retired. He stammered, and I imagined him sitting there in his probably expensive apartment with his probably expensive coffee maker and his probably expensive guilt, trying to figure out what lie would work here, what excuse would make this okay. It was just team bonding. Team bonding. Team bonding. This man really looked at his options, surveyed all the possible responses he could give, and landed on team bonding, like that was somehow going to fly. Like I was going to hear those 2 words and suddenly forget that team bonding happens at bowling alleys and mini golf courses and maybe office happy hours that end at 7 p.m., not at midnight at restaurants where the appetizers cost more than most people's monthly Netflix subscription. I smiled, couldn't help it really. The audacity was almost impressive. Right? I said, my voice dripping with enough sarcasm to fill an Olympic-sized pool. I'm sure it was a very collaborative project. I stretched out the word collaborative like I was savoring it, let it hang in the air between us loaded with all the implications I wasn't saying out loud. Because here's the thing, I didn't need to spell it out. He knew exactly what I was implying. He knew that I knew. And now he knew that I knew that he knew. And we were caught in this weird loop of knowing things that made the whole conversation feel like some kind of psychological thriller where everyone's playing chess except one person doesn't realize they're already in checkmate. Listen, man, I can explain, he started, but I cut him off. Can you though? I asked, still sipping my coffee like I had all the time in the world and zero concerns about where this conversation was going. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks pretty straightforward. Expensive restaurant, late night, my wife coming home at 4 a.m. smelling like your cologne. I mean, I'm no detective, but even I can connect those dots, and I barely passed geometry in high school. Another pause. Shorter this time, but somehow more desperate. I could hear him breathing faster now, could picture him running his hands through his hair or loosening his tie or doing whatever stressed-out corporate dudes do when they realize they've been caught doing something that could get them fired, divorced if he's married, which I suddenly realized I didn't even know and didn't care, and definitely blacklisted from the husband community. It wasn't. He was really struggling here, and part of me, a small, petty part that I'm not particularly proud of, but also not particularly ashamed of, was enjoying watching him squirm through the phone line. Look, you've got the wrong idea about. Do I? I interrupted again, because honestly his excuses were boring me and I had other calls to make. Because my wrong idea includes bank statements, timestamps, and physical evidence. So unless you're about to tell me that you and Mira were actually conducting a very thorough market research project that required wine pairings and perfume testing, I think my idea is pretty accurate. Silence again. But this time it was different. This was the silence of surrender, of a man who'd run out of lies and excuses and was finally facing the reality that he'd been caught. I could practically feel his panic through the phone, could imagine him calculating how bad this was going to get, whether I was going to tell his boss, whether I was going to do something crazy. Spoiler alert, I wasn't going to do anything crazy. I was going to do something calculated, which is actually way scarier. I have to go, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Yeah, I said, smiling into my coffee cup. I figured you might. Oh, and Brent, you might want to update your LinkedIn, because something tells me your collaborative working relationship with Mira is about to get a lot less collaborative. He hung up. Didn't say goodbye, didn't try to explain further, just clicked off like his phone had suddenly become radioactive. The call ended with that little beep that sounded weirdly final, like the closing bell at a boxing match or the gavel at a trial. Round one me. Knockout, also me. I set my phone down on the table and stared at it for a second, feeling something that wasn't quite satisfaction, but wasn't quite anger either. It was more like clarity, purpose. The first domino had fallen, and I could already see how the rest of them were going to tumble down in this beautiful, terrible chain reaction that I was orchestrating from my kitchen table in my pajamas while drinking coffee that tasted like liquid revenge. From the bedroom, I heard the shower turn off. Mira would be getting ready soon, probably putting on her work clothes and her work face and all the other armor she wore to pretend everything was fine. She'd come out here eventually, kiss me on the cheek like nothing happened, maybe ask what I wanted for dinner like we were still playing house instead of starring in the world's most predictable infidelity drama. But I wasn't done making calls. Not even close. Because if there's one thing I learned from watching too many crime documentaries at 2 in the morning, it's that you need more than one witness, more than one piece of evidence, more than one domino falling. You need a whole cascade. You need overwhelming proof. You need the kind of ammunition that leaves no room for denial or excuses or it wasn't what it looked like. I pulled up another contact in my phone. One Mira had no idea still existed, one she'd forgotten about because she'd gotten too comfortable, too careless, too confident that she'd covered all her bases. I smiled again, that cold, calculated smile that was becoming my new default expression, and started dialing. The game wasn't just on anymore. The game was about to go nuclear. The second call I made wasn't to some coworker or mutual friend or anyone in Myra's immediate orbit. No, I was thinking bigger, way bigger. I scrolled past about 50 contacts until I landed on the name that made me smile for the first time all morning with something that actually resembled genuine happiness instead of that bitter, vengeful satisfaction I'd been running on since 4 a.m. Uncle Ray. Detective Raymond Cooper, retired, legend, absolute menace to criminals and family drama alike, and the only person in my contact list who'd probably been waiting his entire retirement for someone to call him with a problem this juicy. Let me tell you about Uncle Ray, because the man deserves his own true crime podcast. He spent 32 years with the Metro Police Department, made detective at 28, which apparently was some kind of record, and spent the next 3 decades solving everything from burglaries to homicides with the kind of success rate that made his colleagues either worship him or hate him, depending on whether they were on his team or competing for promotions. He retired 5 years ago at 55 because he said he'd seen enough of humanity's garbage to last 3 lifetimes and wanted to spend his golden years fishing and not getting shot at, which seemed like reasonable life goals, honestly. But here's the thing about Uncle Ray, retirement didn't retire him. The man still thought like a detective, still talked like a detective, still walked around his house wearing reading glasses attached to those dorky chains like he was constantly ready to investigate something. He treated every family gathering like a cold case, asking questions about everyone's lives with the kind of intensity that made Thanksgiving dinner feel like an interrogation. "How's work, Stephen?" wasn't just small talk, it was an opening statement. "You seem stressed lately," wasn't concern, It was him gathering evidence. The man couldn't turn it off even if he wanted to, and honestly, I don't think he wanted to. I hit his contact, and he picked up on the first ring. Of course he did. It was 8:45 a.m. on a Wednesday, which for normal retirees meant coffee and morning news. But for Uncle Ray meant he'd already been awake for 3 hours, gone for a run, read 2 newspapers, and was probably halfway through organizing his tackle box or whatever detective-obsessed retirees do with their free time. "Morning, Ray," I said, trying to sound casual and probably failing because my voice had that edge to it that happens when you've been awake too long and consumed too much caffeine and discovered your wife's been cheating on you. "Morning." His voice came through the speaker like gravel in a blender, rough and direct, and completely devoid of the polite cushioning most people use in conversations. "It's 7:45, that's brunch time for drama. What happened? See, this is why I loved Uncle Ray. No, how are you doing? No, what's new?" Just straight to the point like he already knew I wasn't calling to chat about the weather or his tomato garden or whatever wholesome topics normal uncles discuss with their nephews. He could smell a problem through the phone line, and he was already putting on his detective hat before I'd even explained the situation. I told him everything. The 4:03 a.m. entrance, the cologne that could knock out a small army, the wine glasses, the missing charger, the velvet spoon charge, the phone call with Brent that went about, as well as a lead balloon at a helium convention. I laid it all out like I was giving a deposition, and he listened without interrupting once, which if you knew Uncle Ray, was basically the equivalent of other people giving you a standing ovation. The man had opinions about everything, but when someone was telling him a story, he shut up and listened like his life depended on it. When I finished, there was a pause. Not an uncomfortable silence like with Brent, but more like the pause you hear in movies right before the mentor figure says something profound that changes the whole trajectory of the hero's journey. I could practically hear him processing, connecting dots, building a mental file folder labeled Myra's infidelity, the evidence. Then he whistled, long and low, the kind of whistle that means, "Oh buddy, you're in it now." "So you want me to tell her?" he asked, and I could hear the excitement in his voice barely contained beneath his gruff exterior. This was what he lived for now. The chase, the investigation, the satisfaction of catching someone in a lie. Retirement had probably been boring him to death, and I'd just handed him a case on a silver platter. "No," I said, because as much as I loved the mental image of Uncle Ray following Mira around town like some kind of geriatric spy movie, that wasn't what I needed. "I just want to know how to stage poetic karma without going to jail." He chuckled, and it sounded like a lawnmower trying to start. "So you want results, not revenge." "Exactly," I said, warming up to this conversation more by the second. "Quiet, clean, maybe just emotionally devastating enough that she understands the consequences of her actions without me having to actually commit any felonies." He laughed so hard he started coughing. That deep, wheezy cough that happens when retired detectives who probably smoked too many cigarettes during stakeouts find something genuinely hilarious. When he finally caught his breath, I could hear him wheezing out words between chuckles. "You always were the polite assassin of the family," he said, and I could picture him shaking his head with that mix of pride and amusement he usually reserved for when someone did something clever but slightly illegal. "Your mother raised you too nice, but you got that Cooper mean streak buried deep down. I like it. So you'll help?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer because Uncle Ray would rather die than turn down an opportunity to solve a mystery, especially one that involved family and catching bad guys, or in this case, bad wives and their sketchy co-workers. "Help? Kid, I'm already planning this out like a military operation. Give me 2 hours." He paused, and I could hear paper rustling in the background like he was already taking notes. "Actually, scratch that. I'll come by tomorrow morning. 9 a.m. sharp. Don't eat breakfast. I'm bringing donuts because apparently that's what detectives do in movies, and I've never actually done it during my entire career, so we're doing this right. Plus, we're going to need the sugar for energy because what I'm planning is going to take some time." "What are you planning exactly?" I asked, suddenly both excited and terrified because Uncle Ray's plans had a tendency to be either brilliant or completely insane with very little middle ground. "A surprise," he said, and I could hear the grin in his voice. "Let's just say I've got some resources you don't know about, some connections that still owe me favors, and 32 years of experience making guilty people squirm. You want poetic justice?" I'm about to compose you a whole symphony. Ray, you can't do anything illegal, I said, feeling like I needed to establish some ground rules before this spiraled into something that would make us both feature prominently in a true crime documentary. Who said anything about illegal? He sounded offended, which probably meant he was already planning something that existed in that gray area between legal and technically not prosecutable. Everything I do is by the book. It's just that I've read a lot of books, and some of them have very interesting chapters most people skip over. Before I could ask what that meant, he continued. Listen, here's what's going to happen. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., your place. I'm bringing donuts, coffee. The good stuff, not that gas station garbage, and a folder. You're going to love this folder. It's going to have everything we need to make sure Mira and her little boyfriend understand that actions have consequences, and also that you don't mess with a Cooper family member because we're petty, we're organized, and we've got too much free time. What's in the folder? I asked, genuinely curious now. Evidence, documentation, photographs if we're lucky, and a plan so beautiful it should be hanging in an art museum. But I'm not spoiling it over the phone. This reveal deserves an in-person audience. He paused again. Oh, and one more thing. Does Mira know I'm retired law enforcement? Yeah, I think I mentioned it at our wedding, I said, remembering the reception where Uncle Ray had cornered half the guests with stories about his most interesting cases until my mother begged him to stop scaring Myra's relatives. Perfect. So she knows I've got resources, training, and absolutely no qualms about using both. He sounded positively gleeful now. This is going to be good. This is going to be real good. I haven't had this much fun since I caught that city councilman embezzling from the parks department. You remember that? Made the front page. Got a commendation. Good times. Ray, I just want her to know that I know and that there are consequences. I don't need a front page scandal, I said, trying to rein this in before it became the talk of the entire metropolitan area. Right, low profile. I got it, he said in a tone that suggested he absolutely did not got it and was already planning something that would be the opposite of low profile. Look, trust me on this. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Wear something comfortable because we're going to be setting up a show, and shows require preparation. Also, clear your schedule for the morning. Actually, clear it for the whole day. This is going to be an event. What kind of event? I asked, feeling like I was signing up for something without reading the terms and conditions. The kind where everyone learns a valuable lesson about honesty, fidelity, and why you don't cheat on someone whose uncle spent 3 decades interrogating people for a living. He chuckled again. Oh, and one more thing. Does Mira have anywhere she needs to be tomorrow morning? She usually leaves for work around 8:30, I said. Tell her you need her home by 9. Make up some excuse. Broken dishwasher, contractor coming, whatever. Just get her there. Trust me. And here's the thing. I did trust him. Maybe that made me crazy. Maybe it made me vindictive. Maybe it made me the kind of person my mother would be disappointed in at the next family gathering. But I didn't care. Uncle Ray had never steered me wrong before, and something about the confidence in his voice made me believe that whatever he was planning would be exactly what this situation needed. Okay, I said. 9 a.m. tomorrow. I'll make sure she's here. Attaboy, he said, and I could hear him already moving around, probably pulling out old case files or making phone calls or doing whatever retired detectives do when they're planning operations. Get some sleep tonight if you can. Tomorrow's going to be fun. The good kind of fun. The justice kind. He hung up without saying goodbye because Uncle Ray didn't believe in prolonged phone farewells, and I sat there staring at my phone with a smile that was probably borderline concerning. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Donuts, coffee, and apparently a surprise that was going to teach everyone a lesson. I couldn't wait. At exactly 10 a.m., because Myra's internal clock apparently only worked when it came to waking up late enough to avoid uncomfortable conversations, she emerged from our bedroom wearing sunglasses. Inside, in our house, like she was some kind of celebrity trying to avoid paparazzi at the grocery store. Except the only person here was her husband, who'd spent the last 6 hours documenting her infidelity like he was preparing for a TED Talk on betrayal. The sunglasses were designer, obviously. Some brand I couldn't pronounce that probably cost more than my first car and came in a case that was nicer than my wallet. She wore them perched on her face like armor. Like if she couldn't see me clearly, then somehow I couldn't see her clearly either, which is not how vision or guilt works, but hey, I wasn't going to interrupt her delusion. Not yet, anyway. I had plans, and those plans required me to play along with this charade for exactly one more day. Morning. I said from my position at the kitchen table where I'd been sitting for the past 2 hours, scrolling through my phone and absolutely not researching divorce attorneys in our area. Okay, fine, I was totally researching divorce attorneys, but in my defense, it's called being prepared. It's called due diligence. It's called, when your wife comes home at 4 a.m. smelling like another man's cologne, maybe you start thinking about your legal options. She stretched, actually stretched like she was in some kind of yoga video, arms above her head, making this little sound that was probably supposed to be cute, but just came across as theatrical, and yawned so wide I could see her back molars. Morning, she mumbled back, her voice still scratchy from sleep or wine or lies. Probably all three mixed together in some unholy cocktail of consequences she hadn't faced yet. Rough night, I asked, keeping my voice light and conversational, like I was asking about the weather or her opinion on what we should watch on Netflix later. Like I hadn't spent the entire night cataloging evidence and making phone calls and planning her emotional destruction with a retired detective who was probably right now sharpening his metaphorical knives in preparation for tomorrow's main event. The team had a few drinks, she said, shuffling toward the coffee maker like a zombie in designer pajamas. She said it so casually, so matter-of-factly, like the team had a few drinks, was a complete explanation for coming home when most people are waking up for their morning jogs. Like, a few drinks somehow justified spending $173 at a restaurant that has sommeliers and requires reservations 3 weeks in advance. I watched her pour coffee into her favorite mug, the one that said, "World's Best Wife," that her mom got her last Christmas, and wow, the irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife and serve it at the velvet spoon with a side of betrayal. She added cream, 2 sugars, stirred it exactly 12 times counterclockwise because she was one of those people with weird routines she claimed helped her focus, but really just made her predictable. Must have been a long few drinks, I said, still playing the role of oblivious husband even though every fiber of my being wanted to slam my hand on the table and yell, "I know everything," like some dramatic reveal in a courtroom drama. You came home after the moon clocked out. She laughed, actually laughed, this nervous little sound that came out wrong, like a car trying to start in cold weather. "Don't be dramatic," she said, waving her hand dismissively like my concern about her whereabouts was just me being silly, just me being one of those overly attached husbands who thinks his wife should come home at reasonable hours and not smell like a cologne commercial. "Oh, I'm not," I said, taking a sip of my own coffee and maintaining eye contact over the rim of my mug like we were in some kind of staring contest, except she couldn't see my eyes because of her ridiculous sunglasses. Drama needs an audience. "I'm just documenting." The words came out before I could stop them, and I saw her freeze for just a second, just a fraction of a moment where her hand paused mid-stir and her shoulders tensed up like she'd heard something she wasn't supposed to hear. But then she recovered, smiled that fake smile she'd been perfecting over the past few months, and went back to her coffee like I hadn't just dropped a hint the size of a billboard. "Documenting what?" she asked, trying to sound amused, but landing somewhere closer to nervous. "My coffee routine." "Sure," I said, smiling back at her with the kind of smile that doesn't reach your eyes. "Let's go with that." She didn't catch that last part, or at least she pretended not to, which at this point was basically her default setting. Pretend everything's fine. Pretend the marriage isn't circling the drain like water going down after you've flushed something that shouldn't be flushed. Pretend that wearing sunglasses inside your own house is normal behavior for someone who has nothing to hide. She walked over to where I was sitting, leaned down, and kissed my cheek. The universal sign for please don't check my texts, please don't ask questions, please just let me get away with this, because confrontation is uncomfortable and I'm really good at avoiding uncomfortable things. Her lips were cold from the air conditioning and her perfume was back to normal, that vanilla-lavender combo that used to smell like home, but now just smelled like someone trying to cover up evidence. "I've got to get ready for work," she said, pulling back and heading toward the bedroom like she was escaping a crime scene. "Big presentation today. Brent wants me to lead the client meeting." Brent. She actually said his name. Just dropped it into casual conversation like it was nothing, like I hadn't called that man 3 hours ago and listened to him stammer through the worst alibi since the dog ate my homework. The audacity was almost impressive. It was like watching someone juggle chainsaws while standing in a pool of gasoline next to an open flame. Technically impressive, definitely stupid, absolutely going to end in disaster. Good luck with that, I said, managing to keep my voice neutral even though internally I was screaming. I'm sure you and Brent will do great together. You seem to work really well as a team. If she caught the emphasis I put on team and together, she didn't show it. Just waved over her shoulder and disappeared into the bedroom, probably to pick out an outfit that said professional career woman and not person having an affair with her team lead while her husband plans her public humiliation with a retired detective. I listened to her get ready, the shower turning on, the blow dryer, the opening and closing of drawers and closet doors. Normal morning sounds that would have been comforting a week ago, but now just sounded like the ticking of a clock counting down to tomorrow morning, when Uncle Ray would show up with his folder and his donuts and his 32 years of experience making guilty people squirm. She emerged 20 minutes later fully dressed, fully made up, looking like the successful corporate professional she presented to the world. Hair perfect, makeup perfect, outfit perfectly pressed and coordinated. She looked good. I had to give her that. She looked like someone who had their life together, not like someone whose life was about to fall apart in spectacular fashion because they thought they were smarter than they actually were. I'll be home around 6, she said, grabbing her bag and her keys, checking her phone one more time before heading to the door. Want me to pick up dinner? The question was so normal, so domestic, so absolutely ridiculous given the circumstances that I almost laughed. She was asking about dinner like we were still playing house. Like we were still that couple who coordinated meals and talked about our days and pretended that everything was fine when clearly nothing was fine and hadn't been fine for months. Sure, I said, because what else was I supposed to say? Whatever you want. She smiled. That fake smile again that didn't reach her eyes, that smile that said, I'm glad we're okay, when we were absolutely not okay and would never be okay again. Great. Love you. She threw it out there like a grenade disguised as affection. Those two words that used to mean something, but now just sounded like a lie wrapped in routine, wrapped in desperation. She didn't even wait for me to respond before she was out the door, keys jingling, heels clicking on the driveway, car starting up and pulling away like she was escaping. I watched her drive off from the kitchen window, watched her disappear down the street toward her office where she'd spend the day working with Brent and probably texting him about how her clueless husband didn't suspect anything, how they were safe, how they could keep this going as long as they were careful. Except they weren't safe. Not even a little bit. I pulled out my phone and texted Uncle Ray. Living room. 9 a.m. tomorrow. Bring popcorn. He responded immediately. Already got a bag of the good stuff. Movie theater butter. This is going to be better than cable. I smiled. A real smile this time. Not the fake ones I'd been giving Mira all morning. Tomorrow was going to be spectacular. Tomorrow was going to be the kind of confrontation that people talk about for years, the kind of justice that felt earned and deserved and perfectly orchestrated. Tomorrow, Mira was going to learn that you can't just say don't ask and expect the questions to disappear. Tomorrow, she was going to learn that wearing sunglasses inside doesn't make you invisible. Tomorrow, she was going to learn that the husband she thought was too dumb to notice was actually smart enough to build a case that would make Perry Mason proud. But today I was just going to sit here, drink my coffee, and enjoy the calm before the storm. Because the storm was coming. Oh boy, was it coming. And it was going to be beautiful. I started cleaning the house like a man possessed, like I was preparing for company, which technically I was. I vacuumed, dusted, organized, made sure everything was perfect because when you're about to stage a confrontation of epic proportions, the least you can do is make sure your living room doesn't look like a disaster area. Even revenge deserves a proper stage. By the time I finished, the house looked better than it had in months. Everything in its place, everything clean and organized and ready for tomorrow's show. I stood in the middle of the living room, looked around at my handiwork, and felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Control. Tomorrow at 9 a.m., Uncle Ray would walk through that door with his folder and his evidence and his decades of experience. And Mira, sweet, clueless Mira who thought she'd gotten away with it, would walk into the surprise of her life. I couldn't wait. I cleaned that house like Martha Stewart was coming over to film a home improvement segment. Except instead of showing people how to arrange decorative pillows, I was preparing the stage for my wife's complete emotional dismantling. Every cushion got fluffed, every surface got wiped down, every piece of clutter got organized into neat little piles that screamed, "A man with his life together lives here," instead of "A man whose marriage is imploding lives here eating cereal over the sink at 2 in the morning." The living room got special attention because that's where tomorrow's main event would take place. I arranged the furniture like I was setting up for an interview show. Couch facing the armchair, coffee table positioned perfectly in the middle where Uncle Ray could dramatically slide evidence across like we were in some kind of legal thriller. I even bought fresh flowers for the side table because apparently when you're planning to destroy someone's world, aesthetics still matter. The flowers were lilies, which I later Googled and discovered symbolize renewal and rebirth, and honestly, that felt appropriate. This was going to be my rebirth, my liberation, my congratulations on finally growing a spine moment. I vacuumed twice. Twice. Not because the carpet was particularly dirty, but because the sound of the vacuum was oddly therapeutic and also drowned out the part of my brain that kept asking, "Are you sure about this?" Yes, brain, I'm sure. When your wife comes home at 4 a.m. smelling like another man and lies to your face while wearing sunglasses indoors like some kind of knockoff celebrity, you can be pretty damn sure about burning that bridge and roasting marshmallows over the flames. By 3 p.m., the house looked like something out of a home design magazine, the kind where everything's perfectly staged and you know nobody actually lives there because real people don't keep their homes this clean unless they're either OCD or preparing for company or plotting elaborate revenge schemes. In my case, it was option 3 with a side of option 2 because having Uncle Ray over meant the house needed to be presentable, and having Uncle Ray over to confront my cheating wife meant the house needed to be immaculate. I even brewed a fresh pot of coffee. The good stuff, not the grocery store brand I usually bought, because I'm cheap and caffeine is caffeine regardless of whether it costs $8 or $25 per bag. But this was a special occasion. This was the kind of event that required premium coffee, the kind that comes in bags with names like Midnight Thunder or Smoky Mountain Awakening, and tastes like someone liquefied sophistication and poured it into a cup. When you're about to drop nuclear truth bombs, caffeine helps. Good caffeine helps even more. Uncle Ray arrived early. Of course he did, because punctuality was apparently a detective superpower they taught at the academy along with how to read people and how to make criminals confess through sheer intimidation. It was 8:47 a.m., 13 minutes before our scheduled meeting time, and he walked through my door like he owned the place wearing his old detective jacket. The jacket was leather, worn in all the right places, and had that look that said, "I've seen things, I've done things, and I'm about to make your life very difficult if you cross me." He carried a folder. Not just any folder. This thing was labeled evidence, spouses and other criminals, in his handwriting that looked like it had been forged in some kind of law enforcement font factory. The label alone made me want to high-five him. But we were professionals here. Well, he was a professional. I was just a guy whose wife thought he was too stupid to notice her affair, which honestly made me want to prove her wrong more than anything else in my entire life. "Nice place," Uncle Ray said, looking around the living room with the kind of appreciation you show when you notice someone's put in effort. "You clean all this yourself or hire somebody?" "Did it myself," I said, probably sounding a little too proud. "Figured if we're going to stage an intervention/confrontation/emotional apocalypse, we should at least do it in a clean environment." He nodded approvingly, setting his folder down on the coffee table with the kind of reverence usually reserved for sacred texts or classified documents. "Presentation matters. I've conducted interviews in interrogation rooms that looked worse than most people's garages." "You did good, kid." Coming from Uncle Ray, that was basically the equivalent of winning an Oscar. The man didn't give compliments unless they were earned, and even then he delivered them like he was doing you a favor by acknowledging your existence. "Got everything?" I asked, eyeing the folder like it contained the secrets of the universe instead of just the secrets of my wife's infidelity. He tapped the folder with one finger, and I swear I heard angels singing. Or maybe that was just my imagination running wild with anticipation, but either way, the gesture was pregnant with promise. Receipts, photos, timestamps, GPS data from her phone. Don't ask how I got that. It's better you don't know. And even her boss's parking records from the office garage showing his car was there until 11 p.m. on 3 separate occasions when she claimed she was working late. I blinked. You got all that in less than 24 hours. Kid, I spent 32 years getting information people didn't want me to have. This was Tuesday morning easy. I've had harder cases solving who ate the last donut in the break room. He paused, reached into his jacket pocket, and pulled out his phone. Oh, and a clip. A clip? I asked, not sure I wanted to know, but also desperately needing to know. He grinned, not a happy grin, but the kind of grin a cat makes when it's cornered a mouse and is deciding whether to play with it first or just end the game. Security footage from the Velvet Spoon parking lot. Nothing explicit, don't worry. I'm not running some kind of surveillance state operation here, but let's just say it shows your wife and Mr. Team Lead getting very friendly by his car. Hugging. Extended hugging. The kind of hugging that would make HR write up a violation report. I sat down on the couch because my legs suddenly felt like they'd forgotten how bones work. I knew she'd been cheating. Hell, I'd known since 4:03 a.m. when she stumbled through the door smelling like a cologne factory explosion. But having actual video evidence felt different. It felt real. It felt like the difference between suspecting someone robbed your house and actually watching the security footage of them walking out with your TV. You good? Uncle Ray asked, sitting down in the armchair across from me with the casual ease of someone who'd delivered bad news to hundreds of people over his career and had learned to spot when someone was about to lose it. Yeah, I said, even though I wasn't entirely sure that was true. Just processing. Take your time. We've got. He checked his watch, an old-school analog thing that probably cost less than Myra's sunglasses, but had more character than her entire wardrobe, about 8 minutes before showtime. You want to see the footage first or wait for the live reveal? I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. Live reveal. I want to see her face when she realizes she's been caught. Uncle Ray nodded like I'd just given the correct answer on a game show. Good choice. Always better to have the audience experience the evidence in real time. Creates more impact. More. What's the word the kids use these days? Drama? No, wait. Tea. Creates more tea. I couldn't help but laugh. Here was this 60-year-old retired detective trying to use Gen Z slang and somehow making it work through sheer confidence and the fact that he was about to help me catch my wife in a lie so big it needed its own zip code. Uncle Ray, you can't say tea and expect it to land, I said, still laughing despite the fact that my marriage was ending and my life was basically a country song without the truck or the dog. Why not? Tea is tea. It's a beverage. Makes perfect sense. He shrugged like language was just another puzzle he'd solve eventually through persistence and refusal to accept defeat. We sat there for a moment in comfortable silence, the kind of silence that happens between people who are on the same team and about to execute a plan that's either brilliant or completely insane. The folder sat on the coffee table between us like a loaded gun, just waiting to go off. She's not ready for this episode, Uncle Ray said finally, breaking the silence with the kind of understatement that would make British people proud. No, I agreed. She's really not. Good. He leaned back in the armchair, laced his fingers behind his head like he was settling in to watch his favorite movie. I've been retired for 5 years, and honestly, I've been bored out of my mind. Fishing's great, don't get me wrong, but you can only catch so many bass before you start missing the thrill of catching people in lies. This is going to be fun. Define fun, I said, suddenly nervous about what exactly Uncle Ray considered entertaining. The good kind of fun. The justice kind. The kind where bad people face consequences and good people get closure and everyone learns a valuable lesson about honesty and fidelity and why you don't mess with someone whose uncle has access to private investigators, security footage, and a Rolodex full of people who owe him favors. He grinned again. That kind of fun. I nodded, feeling my confidence return like a wave washing over a beach. This was happening. This was really happening. In approximately 6 minutes, Mira would walk through that door expecting a normal Wednesday morning, maybe expecting me to ask about her day or tell her I was running to the hardware store. And instead, she'd get Uncle Ray sitting in our living room with a folder full of evidence that could end her career, her reputation, and definitely our marriage. You nervous? Uncle Ray asked, reading me like I was a book written in large print. Terrified, I admitted, but also weirdly excited. Is that normal? Completely normal. You're about to reclaim your power, set a boundary, and stop being the victim in your own life story. That's scary and exciting at the same time, like the first time you jump off a high dive or the first time you tell someone you love them knowing they might not say it back. He paused. Except in this case, you're jumping off the high dive, and she's the water you're about to make a very big splash in. The metaphor was weird, but somehow it worked. I was about to make a splash. A huge splash. The kind of splash that would create ripples for months, maybe years. Uncle Ray checked his watch again. 5 minutes. You ready? I took a deep breath, looked around my immaculately clean living room, thought about the coffee brewing in the kitchen and the folder on the table and the video footage that showed my wife hugging another man in a parking lot at midnight, and nodded. Yeah, I said. I'm ready. Then let's do this. Uncle Ray cracked his knuckles like a concert pianist preparing for a performance. Time to serve up some justice with a side of uncomfortable truth. My favorite meal. At 8:45 a.m., the front door opened with that familiar click that used to mean my wife is home, but now meant the main event is about to start and I have front row seats to the greatest show on earth. I heard her keys jingling, heard her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. Those same expensive heels she'd been carrying in her hand 2 nights ago at 4:03 in the morning, and then heard her stop dead in her tracks like she'd just walked into an invisible wall made entirely of oh crap. Mira stood in the doorway between the entryway and the living room, frozen like someone had hit pause on a movie right before the plot twist. She was holding a croissant in one hand, because apparently she'd stopped at that bougie bakery downtown that charges $8 for bread-shaped fancy, and her work bag in the other, looking like she'd just invented brunch and was ready to have a casual Wednesday morning before heading to the office to do whatever corporate people do when they're not having affairs with their coworkers. Then she saw us. Uncle Ray was sitting on the couch like a judge at a talent show, except instead of holding up scorecards, he was flipping through his folder with the kind of casual menace that comes from 3 decades of making criminals sweat. I sat beside him, calm as a monk with Wi-Fi and a fully charged phone, holding my coffee mug like it was a prop in a play I'd been rehearsing my entire life for this exact moment. Her jaw dropped, literally dropped, like someone had cut the strings holding it up, and her face went through about 17 different emotions in the span of 3 seconds. Confusion, recognition, panic, forced casualness, more panic, and finally settling on that classic, I'm going to pretend this is normal expression that guilty people wear when they're trying to convince themselves they haven't been caught. What's going on? She asked, her voice doing that thing where it goes up at the end like she was asking a question, but really she was just stalling for time while her brain tried to compute what the hell her husband was doing sitting on the couch with a retired detective at 8:45 on a Wednesday morning when he should be at work or running errands or doing literally anything besides this. Team meeting, I said, taking a slow sip of my coffee and maintaining eye contact like we were in some kind of Western standoff, except instead of guns we had evidence and uncomfortable truths. Didn't you say you liked those? Uncle Ray didn't even look up from his folder, just kept flipping pages like he was reading the morning newspaper and not a comprehensive dossier documenting my wife's affair. Hi, Mira, he said, his voice carrying that particular tone cops use when they pull you over and ask if you know why they stopped you. Friendly on the surface, threatening underneath, zero room for bullshit. Heard you had an interesting night the other day. Must be tiring keeping all those co-workers entertained. He said, co-workers, the way other people say cockroaches or jury duty, with just enough disgust to make it clear what he really meant without having to spell it out. Mira blinked. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again like a fish that had just been pulled out of water and was trying to remember how breathing worked. You can't just, she started, but Uncle Ray cut her off by doing something so simple and so devastating that I wanted to stand up and applaud. He slid a photo across the coffee table, not handed it to her, not walked it over. Just slid it across the table like a dealer dealing cards in a poker game where all the hands were terrible and everyone was about to lose their mortgage. The photo landed perfectly in the center of the table, face up, clear as day, damning as hell. It was Mira at the Velvet Spoon, sitting at a corner booth that probably cost extra because it was romantic or private or whatever euphemism fancy restaurants use for good place to have an affair. She was laughing in the photo, head thrown back, wine glass in hand, looking happier than I'd seen her look in months. And there, right next to her with his hand on her waist like he owned the place and the woman, was Brent. Brent from accounting. Brent who gives great feedback. Brent, who was apparently also great at publicly displaying affection with other people's wives in upscale restaurants while spending their money. Mira gasped. Actually gasped, like someone in a soap opera who just found out their evil twin was real. Her face went pale. Not regular pale, but that specific shade of pale that happens when all the blood drains from your face because your brain needs it more to process the fact that you've been completely, totally, undeniably caught. I sipped my coffee. The moment was too perfect to rush. This was art. This was justice. This was better than any revenge movie I'd ever seen because this was real and it was happening in my living room, and I had premium coffee and a front row seat. That's, she started, but her voice cracked like thin ice under too much weight. That's not what it looks like. Uncle Ray supplied helpfully, finally glancing up from his folder with the kind of expression that said he'd heard that excuse approximately 8,000 times in his career, and it hadn't worked once. Because it looks like you and Mr. Team Lead here, he tapped Brent's face in the photo, having a very cozy dinner at a very expensive restaurant at a very late hour. But hey, what do I know? I only spent 32 years investigating people who lie for a living. He slid another photo across the table. This one showed Mira and Brent outside in the parking lot, standing by his car, a BMW, naturally, because of course the guy having an affair with my wife drove a car that cost more than most people's annual salary. They were hugging, not a friendly good night, see you at work, hug, but a full body, arms wrapped around each other, faces buried in each other's necks, kind of hug that lasted way longer than any professional relationship required. Extended team bonding. Uncle Ray asked, his voice dripping with more sarcasm than my coffee had caffeine. Very thorough, very hands-on. I'm sure HR would be fascinated by your approach to workplace collaboration. Myra's croissant fell out of her hand, just dropped straight to the floor like her grip on reality, landing with a sad little thud that somehow perfectly captured the mood of this entire situation. She didn't even notice. She was too busy staring at the photos, at Uncle Ray, at me, like she was a computer trying to process too much information at once and about to crash. I can explain, she whispered, finally finding her voice buried somewhere beneath the panic and the realization that her carefully constructed lies were crumbling faster than her overpriced pastry on our clean floor. I leaned back on the couch, crossed my arms, and smiled. Not a nice smile. This smile had teeth, metaphorically speaking, and those teeth were sharp and ready to bite. You could, I said, letting the words hang in the air like smoke. But remember what you said 2 nights ago when you came home at 4 in the morning smelling like a cologne commercial? Remember your exact words. She stared at me, face still pale, eyes wide, looking like she was desperately trying to remember what she'd said, while simultaneously trying to figure out how to unsay it. Don't ask, I supplied, my voice calm and cold and absolutely done with all of this. You said don't ask. So you know what? I'm just following instructions. Uncle Ray chuckled, that low, rumbling sound that came from deep in his chest and somehow managed to fill the entire room with judgment. He leaned back, completely relaxed, looking like a man who was enjoying the best entertainment he'd had in 5 years of retirement. My work here's done, he said, but he didn't move. He just sat there, grinning, watching Mira try to form words that wouldn't come. I reached into my pocket, slowly, deliberately, milking this moment for everything it was worth because I'd earned this, I'd planned this, and I was going to savor every single second. I pulled out an envelope. Not just any envelope, but a nice one, the kind you use for important documents or wedding invitations or, in this case, divorce papers. The envelope was crisp, white, official looking. I'd labeled it in my best handwriting. Performance Review, Marriage Edition. I held it out to her, arm extended, the envelope hanging in the space between us like a white flag, except instead of surrendering, I was declaring victory. Here, I said, since you're so into workplace feedback and professional development, I thought you might appreciate this. Mira didn't take it, just stared at it like it was a live snake or a subpoena or something else that could bite her if she touched it. Her hands were shaking. I could see them trembling by her sides, still holding her work bag like it was the only thing keeping her grounded to reality. What is that? She asked, even though I was pretty sure she already knew or at least suspected, because I wasn't exactly being subtle with the Performance Review, Marriage Edition label. Divorce papers, I said simply, No drama, no yelling, just stating facts like I was reading from a grocery list. Neatly printed, properly filed with the county clerk's office yesterday afternoon while you were at work, labeled appropriately because I figured if you appreciate feedback so much, you should definitely appreciate this. She looked up at me, her eyes starting to water in that way that meant tears were coming. The kind of tears that guilty people cry when they finally realize actions have consequences, and those consequences have addresses and legal documentation. "You're ending it?" she whispered, like she couldn't believe what she was hearing, like the possibility of her husband actually growing a spine and standing up for himself had never occurred to her in all the months she'd been lying to my face. I grinned. Couldn't help it. Really, the question was so absurd, so perfectly encapsulated everything that was wrong with her perspective on this entire situation, that I had to smile, or I would have laughed, and laughing felt too generous for this moment. "Just giving the performance review your behavior deserved," I said, still holding out the envelope like an offering or a threat or both. 0 stars. Would not recommend. Terrible communication, dishonest practices, inappropriate workplace relationships, and frequent violations of the basic terms and conditions outlined in our original agreement. Overall rating. Terminated effective immediately. Uncle Ray actually snorted at that, covering his mouth with his hand like he was trying to maintain professional decorum, but losing the battle. "Kid's got jokes," he muttered to himself, shaking his head with what looked like genuine pride. Mira stood there, speechless, the tears now officially falling down her cheeks, mascara starting to run because apparently she hadn't invested in the waterproof kind. Rookie mistake when you're living a double life that's bound to implode eventually. She looked at the envelope, at me, at Uncle Ray, back at the photos on the table showing her own betrayal immortalized in high-definition color. "This isn't fair," she finally managed to say, which was possibly the most tone-deaf thing she could have said given the circumstances, but also perfectly in character for someone who'd been cheating for months and thought she deserved sympathy. "You're right," I agreed, nodding like she'd made a valid point. "It's not fair. It wasn't fair when you lied to me for months. It wasn't fair when you spent our money on romantic dinners with your coworker. It wasn't fair when you came home at 4 in the morning and told me not to ask questions. So yeah, we're way past fair at this point. We're somewhere in the neighborhood of consequences, and the property values here are pretty brutal." Uncle Ray stood up, collecting his folder with the satisfied air of someone who'd just closed a case. "Well, I think that about covers it," he said, looking at Mira with something between pity and disgust. "You kids have fun working out the details. I'm gonna go get breakfast. Real breakfast, not $8 croissants that end up on the floor." He walked past Mira toward the door, paused, turned back. "Oh, and Mira, next time you decide to have an affair, maybe don't do it in a restaurant with security cameras. Just some free advice from a professional. You're welcome." And then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded louder than any slam could have been. Uncle Ray didn't actually leave. Of course he didn't. The man had 32 years of experience with dramatic exits that weren't actually exits, and this was apparently one of them. He stood by the door, hand on the knob, grinning like a game show host about to reveal the grand prize, except the prize was more emotional devastation. "Actually," he said, turning back around with theatrical flair that would make Broadway jealous, "I think I'll stick around for a few more minutes. This is better than my morning crossword puzzle." He walked back to the armchair and sat down, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees like a seasoned interrogator who'd just remembered he had a few more questions. "Mira," he said, his voice shifting from sarcastic uncle to full detective mode. "On a scale of 1 to subpoena, how honest are you ready to be right now?" Mira crossed her arms defensively, tears still streaming, but her expression hardening into something that looked like anger mixed with cornered animal desperation. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice shaking but trying to sound confident. "You had no right to spy on me." "Spy?" Uncle Ray raised an eyebrow. "I prefer the term independent fact-finding mission. And technically, your husband had every right since you're still legally married and spending joint funds on your little romantic adventures. But sure, let's call it spying if that makes you feel better about getting caught." I couldn't help but jump in. "So was your Uber receipt to the Velvet Spoon. But here we are." Before Mira could formulate whatever defensive argument she was trying to construct, probably something about privacy or trust, Or how dare we fact-check her lies? There was a knock on the door. Not a casual knock, but a hesitant, uncertain knock that sounded like someone was really hoping nobody was home, but knew they had to be there anyway because they'd been summoned. I stood up, walked to the door with the confidence of a man who'd orchestrated this entire production down to the minute, and opened it. Standing on my doorstep, looking like he'd dressed in the dark and regretted every life choice that had led him to this moment, was Brent. Brent Henderson, team lead Brent. Just a friend who gives great feedback, Brent. The same Brent from the photos currently spread across my coffee table like evidence at a crime scene, which technically they were. His face went from nervous to absolutely white when he saw Uncle Ray sitting in the armchair. Not regular white. We're talking ghost white, printer paper white. I've just seen my entire career flash before my eyes white. His mouth opened and closed a few times, no sound coming out, like a car engine trying to start on a cold morning and failing spectacularly. Am I early? He managed to stammer, which was possibly the dumbest question he could have asked given that I'd texted him at 8:30 this morning with a message that said 9 a.m. My house. Don't be late. We need to talk about your team bonding exercises. He knew exactly what this was. He just hadn't expected the full theatrical production. I smiled. That same cold, calculated smile I'd been perfecting over the past 48 hours. Right on time, actually. Come on in, Brent. Take a seat. I gestured to the couch next to Mira, who looked like she wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. Her face had gone from pale to red to some combination of both that made her look like she was having an allergic reaction to consequences. You didn't, she whispered, staring at me with a mixture of horror and disbelief. Oh, I did, I said, closing the door behind Brent, who shuffled into the living room like a man walking to his own execution. You brought the co-workers to the bar? I brought them to breakfast. Fair's fair. Brent sat down on the far end of the couch, as far from Mira as physically possible, while still technically being on the same piece of furniture. He looked like he wanted to melt into the cushions or possibly teleport to another dimension where angry husbands and retired detectives didn't exist. Uncle Ray slid the photos across the table again. The same photos, but now with their starring actors present in the room. So, Brent, he said, his voice carrying that particular tone that made grown men confess to crimes they didn't commit just to make the pressure stop. How's the team bonding going? Looks pretty thorough from these pictures. Very hands-on approach. I'm sure your HR department would be fascinated by your management techniques. Brent looked at the photos, at Mira, at me, back at the photos. His hands were shaking visibly now, gripping his knees like they were the only solid things in a world that had suddenly gone liquid beneath him. It was a misunderstanding, he blurted out, the words coming fast and desperate like he'd been holding them in, and they finally exploded. It wasn't supposed to. I nodded slowly, sitting down in the other armchair and sipping my coffee like I was watching a nature documentary and not the complete destruction of two people's credibility. You know what else was a misunderstanding? I asked calmly. My marriage certificate. I thought it meant something. Apparently, I misunderstood what "till death do us part" actually meant. Silly me. Uncle Ray chuckled, pulling out another photo from his folder. This one a screenshot of text messages. I had no idea how he'd gotten those, and honestly, I didn't want to know. The man had resources that probably weren't entirely legal, but were definitely effective. Want to explain these? He asked, sliding the screenshot toward both of them. Because from what I'm reading here, this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was pretty deliberate. The room went silent. The kind of silence that happens when everyone realizes they've been caught. The evidence is overwhelming, and there's absolutely no way to talk their way out of this corner they'd backed themselves into. The silence in that room was holy. Not church holy, but more like the moment right before a judge reads a verdict, and everyone holds their breath waiting to hear if they're going to prison or walking free. Except in this case, there was no jury, no deliberation, just cold hard evidence, two guilty parties, and a retired detective who looked like he was having the time of his life. Mira looked at me, her face pale and shaking, mascara streaked down her cheeks like war paint applied by someone who'd already lost the battle. She tried to form words, her mouth opening and closing, searching for something, anything, that could possibly make this situation better. Spoiler alert, there was nothing. I can explain, she muttered finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Like if she said it quietly enough, maybe I wouldn't hear it, or maybe the universe would take pity on her and rewind the last 48 hours. I stood up, calm as ever, like I was getting up to refill my coffee instead of ending a marriage that had lasted 5 years on paper, but had actually ended the moment she decided another man's cologne was more important than our wedding vows. I looked down at her, at Brent cowering on the couch like a kid who'd been caught stealing cookies, except the cookies were someone's wife, and I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a weird sense of relief that this was finally over. You could explain, I said slowly, letting each word land with the weight it deserved. But remember what you said 2 nights ago? Your exact words when you stumbled through that door at 4 in the morning. She stared at me, tears flowing freely now, probably realizing where this was going but unable to stop it, like watching a car crash in slow motion. Don't ask, I said, my voice steady and cold. You said don't ask. So you know what? I'm just following instructions. I'm not asking. I'm not wondering. I'm not giving you the opportunity to spin another lie or craft another excuse or tell me it wasn't what it looked like when we both know exactly what it looked like. Uncle Ray chuckled from his armchair, standing up and stretching like he'd just finished watching a particularly satisfying movie. My work here's done, he announced, collecting his folder with the satisfied air of someone who'd successfully closed a case. Try not to trip over your excuses on the way out, Mira. They're everywhere. He walked to the door, paused, and looked back at Brent. Oh, and Brent, might want to update your LinkedIn. Something tells me your collaborative working relationship with Mira is about to become significantly less collaborative. Also, you might want to check your employee handbook regarding fraternization policies. Just a friendly tip from someone who's seen a lot of people lose their jobs for less. Brent looked like he might actually pass out. His face had gone from white to green, and I was genuinely concerned he might throw up on my freshly vacuumed carpet. I reached down and picked up the envelope from where it had fallen near Myra's feet. Those same expensive feet in those same expensive heels that had clicked across our floor at 4 in the morning. I held it out to her again, steady as a surgeon with a scalpel. Take it, I said simply. She looked at the envelope like it was radioactive. You're really ending it? She whispered, the question so absurd I almost laughed. Just like that. I tilted my head, considering her question with the kind of patience you show a child who's asked why the sky is blue. Just like that. I repeated, Mira, you ended it months ago when you started lying to my face. You ended it every time you came home late smelling like someone else. You ended it when you spent our money on romantic dinners with your coworker. I'm just doing the paperwork. I handed her the envelope. Divorce papers, neatly printed, properly filed, labeled feedback form, marriage edition. She took it with shaking hands, staring at it like it might bite her. 0 stars, I said, unable to resist one final callback. Would not recommend. Terrible communication, fraudulent advertising, and severe violations of the service agreement. Overall rating, terminated effective immediately. Please vacate the premises within 30 days as outlined in the documents. Uncle Ray was fully grinning now, heading toward the door. Kid's got jokes and legal knowledge. I taught him well. You didn't teach me any of this, I called after him. Didn't I, though? He winked. See you at Christmas. This story's gonna be legendary at family gatherings. And then he was gone, leaving me standing in my living room with my soon-to-be ex-wife, her affair partner who looked like he wanted to dissolve into the couch cushions, and a sense of closure I hadn't felt in months. Mira stood there speechless, clutching the envelope, probably running through every scenario in her head, trying to figure out how this had happened, how her careful lies had unraveled so spectacularly, how the husband she thought was too oblivious to notice had actually been 10 steps ahead the entire time. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself another cup of coffee, because why not? I had nowhere to be and all the time in the world now that I wasn't spending it worrying about where my wife was or who she was with. I turned back to face them, leaning against the counter with my mug. Next time she mentions a team dinner, I said, looking at the space between them rather than at them directly, I'll send HR a thank you note for taking out my trash. It was petty. It was mean. It was absolutely perfect. And as I stood there in my clean kitchen, in my soon-to-be solely mine house, drinking premium coffee and watching 2 people realize that actions have consequences, I smiled. A real smile this time. Because I was finally, actually, genuinely free. My wife said, "If you can't handle me spending weekends with my ex-husband, maybe we're not right for each other." I replied, "You're spot on." Then I accepted the job transfer to Singapore I'd been turning down for her. When she texted, "What's your weekend like?" I sent a selfie from Changi Airport. "My name's Marcus Lane. I'm 32 years old, and I used to think marriage was about partnership. You know, the whole two people rowing the same boat situation they sell you in those cheesy wedding vows. Turns out, marriage is actually about patience, specifically how long you can keep your cool while your wife flirts with her ex-husband under the flimsy excuse of emotional closure." Yeah, you heard that right. Emotional closure. That's the phrase that's been haunting my existence for the past 3 months like a bad Spotify ad you can't skip. My wife Sienna is 30 years old, and don't get me wrong, when I married her 3 years ago, I thought I'd hit the jackpot. She was charming in that effortless way that makes everyone at parties gravitate toward her like she's got some kind of social magnet implanted in her chest. Witty too, the kind of person who could roast you so smoothly you'd actually laugh while getting burned. But here's the thing nobody mentions in the marriage handbook. Charm and wit don't mean squat when your spouse is allergic to the concept of boundaries like some people are allergic to gluten. When her ex-husband Blake moved back to town about 4 months ago, I didn't think much of it at first. I mean, exes exist, right? They're part of your history, like that embarrassing haircut from high school or that time you thought cargo shorts were a good idea. Sienna came to me all serious one evening, coffee mug in hand, looking like she was about to announce something profound, and said, "Babe, Blake reached out. He's going through a rough time with the divorce finalization and everything. I think we should meet up, for closure." Closure. There's that word again. I remember nodding like an understanding, modern husband who's totally secure and not at all bothered by his wife meeting up with the guy she was married to before me. "Sure," I said, "closure's important." God, I was such an idiot. Closure, as I would discover over the following weeks, is apparently a very time-intensive process. It required multiple coffee dates at that pretentious cafe downtown where a latte costs more than my gym membership. Then it evolved into weekend brunches, because nothing says, "I'm over you," like sharing avocado toast and mimosas every Saturday morning. And then, oh boy, then came the overnight art therapy sessions. Yeah, art therapy. Sienna told me with a straight face that Blake was working through his emotional trauma by painting, and she needed to be there to support his creative healing journey. I'm not making this up. She actually used the phrase creative healing journey, like it was a legitimate thing and not something she pulled out of a self-help book she found in the bargain bin. I tried talking to my friend Noah about it because, honestly, I was starting to feel like I was losing my mind. We were grabbing beers after work one Thursday, and I laid it all out for him. "Man, maybe I'm just overreacting," I said, swirling my beer around like it held the answers to my marital problems. Like, maybe I'm being one of those possessive, insecure husbands who can't handle his wife having male friends. Noah, who's been married for 8 years and has seen some stuff, looked at me like I'd just suggested the earth was flat. "Bro," he said, and when Noah starts with bro, you know some truth is about to drop. Closure doesn't take 6 consecutive weekends and a bottle of wine. That's not closure. That's dating. You're basically her side piece at this point. That hit different, let me tell you. I sat there holding my beer, processing the fact that my own friend just essentially told me I'd been demoted in my own marriage. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized Noah had a point. A very valid, extremely uncomfortable point. Every single weekend for the past month and a half had revolved around Blake's emotional needs. Sienna would get dressed up, and I mean dressed up, like full makeup, hair curled, wearing outfits I hadn't seen since our honeymoon, to go support her ex-husband through his tough time. Meanwhile, I was sitting at home eating leftover pizza and watching Netflix alone like some divorced dad whose kids are at their mom's for the weekend. The kicker? Whenever I tried to bring it up, Sienna had this incredible ability to flip the script and make me feel like I was the problem. "Marcus, why are you being so insecure?" she'd say, tilting her head in that condescending way that made me want to throw something. "Blake is going through a really hard time, and I'm just being a good friend. You know I'm with you. Why can't you trust me?" And there it was, the trust card. She'd play it every single time, and like a chump, I'd back down because I didn't want to be that guy, The controlling, Jealous husband who can't handle his wife having a life outside their marriage. But here's what really started eating at me, the double standard of it all. During this whole Blake situation, my company had been dangling this incredible opportunity in front of me. We're talking dream job territory here. Lead operations manager for our Singapore office, $145,000 base salary, housing allowance, relocation package, and an apartment with a skyline view that would make your Instagram followers weep with envy. It was the kind of offer that comes once in a career, the kind that changes your entire life trajectory. And I'd already turned it down. Twice. Why? Because every time I brought it up with Sienna, she'd shoot it down faster than you can say emotional closure. I can't move to Singapore, Marcus, she'd say, looking at me like I'd just suggested we relocate to Mars. My entire family is here. My mom, my brother, my friends, my career. You can't expect me to just abandon everything I've built. And like the supportive husband I was trying to be, I'd nod and say, "You're right, babe. We'll figure something else out." Meanwhile, she was spending every weekend with Blake, prioritizing his emotional well-being over our marriage. But somehow my career opportunity was the unreasonable ask. The moment everything crystallized for me happened on a random Tuesday morning. I was getting ready for work, standing in our bedroom tying my tie, when Sienna came out of the bathroom wearing this gorgeous sundress, makeup already done, hair perfectly styled. It was 9 a.m. on a Tuesday. "Going somewhere?" I asked, already knowing the answer but hoping I was wrong. "Oh, Blake's going through a rough morning," she said casually while putting on earrings. "I'm just going to grab brunch with him, help him process some feelings." I stood there, tie half done, watching my wife get dolled up for another man, and something inside me just snapped. "Do you really need to see him every weekend?" I asked, and I could hear the exhaustion in my own voice. "And now weekdays too." She turned to me with this smile that I can only describe as the exact expression a politician makes when facing the press after a scandal. Sweet, practiced, and completely hollow. "He's my ex-husband, Marcus. I'm helping him heal. It's called compassion. Maybe you should try it sometime." The casual cruelty of that comment just hung in the air between us. I watched her grab her purse, check her lipstick one more time in the mirror, and head for the door. Right before she left, she turned back and said, "If you can't handle me spending time with my ex-husband, then maybe we're not right for each other." She said it so matter-of-factly, like she was commenting on the weather or suggesting we switch laundry detergents. Then she walked out, leaving me standing there in our bedroom with my half-tied tie and the sudden, crystal-clear realization that she was absolutely right. We weren't right for each other. Not anymore. Maybe we never were. And you know what? I was completely okay with that. Every single weekend turned into what I started calling the Blake Festival in my head, and honestly, if they sold tickets, Sienna would have been VIP pass holder number one. Saturday brunches became as regular as my morning coffee, except way more annoying and significantly more expensive since she kept using our joint credit card to pay for their emotional support meals. Sunday turned into movie therapy days, because apparently watching films together is crucial for processing divorce trauma or whatever pseudo-psychological garbage she was selling me. And then, just when I thought the schedule couldn't get more ridiculous, Friday evening casual check-ins got added to the roster like some kind of bonus content nobody asked for. I tried to be reasonable about it at first. I really did. One Saturday morning, while she was doing her makeup for the third weekend in a row, I walked into the bathroom and asked as calmly as I could manage, "Do you really need to see him every single weekend?" I wasn't even being accusatory. I was genuinely asking, like maybe there was some logical explanation I was missing, some piece of the puzzle that would make this whole situation make sense. She turned to me with her mascara wand still in hand and smiled like a politician at a press conference who just got asked about their offshore bank accounts. You know that smile? The one that's technically a smile, but has absolutely zero warmth behind it. The kind that makes you feel like you're being managed rather than talked to. "He's my ex-husband, Marcus," she said. Turning back to the mirror to continue her makeup routine like this was the most obvious thing in the world. "I'm helping him heal. It's what good people do. We don't just abandon people when they're struggling." The implication hung in the air like a bad smell, that if I had a problem with this, I wasn't a good person. It was masterful manipulation, really. I almost wanted to applaud the technique, except I was too busy feeling like an absolute chump standing there in my own bathroom, being made to feel guilty for having the audacity to want my wife to, spend time with me occasionally. Right? I said, and I could hear the sarcasm dripping from my voice even though I was trying to keep it neutral. So you're basically a full-time emotional nurse now? Should I start calling you Florence Nightingale? Or is that too on the nose? She didn't even respond to that one. Just gave me this look like I was being childish and unreasonable, which somehow made everything worse. I left the bathroom before I said something I'd regret, which was becoming a pattern in our conversations lately. Meanwhile, while my marriage was slowly circling the drain like hair in a shower, my career was actually trying to throw me a lifeline. My boss, Richard, had pulled me into his office for the third time in 2 months to discuss the Singapore position. "Marcus, I'm going to be straight with you," he said, leaning back in his chair with that serious expression that meant he was about to say something important. "This opportunity isn't going to wait forever. We need someone in Singapore, and you're our first choice. But if you keep declining, we're going to have to move on to other candidates." The offer was still sitting there, gleaming like a golden ticket. $145,000 base salary, full housing allowance that would cover a luxury apartment in one of the most expensive cities in the world, relocation package, signing bonus, and a view that would make your eyes water. It was so beautiful. I'd already turned it down twice at this point, and both times it was because Sienna had shut down the conversation before it could even really start. "I can't move. Marcus," she'd said the first time I brought it up, barely looking up from her phone, where she was probably texting Blake about their next brunch date. "My family's here. My whole life is here. You can't seriously expect me to just pack up and leave everything behind." The irony of her saying this while actively choosing to spend all her free time with another man wasn't lost on me, but I let it go because I was still trying to be the understanding husband. The second time I brought up Singapore, I'd actually prepared a whole presentation. I'm talking spreadsheets, cost of living comparisons, photos of potential apartments, research on expat communities, the whole 9 yards. I thought if I could show her how amazing this opportunity was, how it could change our lives, she'd at least consider it. But she barely glanced at my carefully prepared documents before saying, "Marcus, I already told you. My career is here. My family is here. This isn't up for discussion." Then she'd gone back to getting ready for her Sunday movie therapy session with Blake, and I'd closed my laptop feeling like the world's biggest idiot for even trying. But that Tuesday morning, after she'd basically told me that if I couldn't handle her weekend boyfriend situation, then maybe we weren't right for each other, something shifted in my brain. It was like all the puzzle pieces suddenly clicked into place, and I could see the whole picture clearly for the first time in months. She could prioritize Blake's emotional needs over our marriage, spend every weekend playing therapist to her ex-husband, use our money to fund their little reunion tour, but my career opportunity, the one that could actually improve our lives and financial situation, was completely off the table because it would inconvenience her. The double standard was so massive you could see it from space. So that evening, after Sienna came home from her Tuesday brunch special smelling like Blake's cologne and talking about how emotionally vulnerable he'd been today, I made a decision. She went to take a shower, probably to wash off the guilt or whatever, and I sat down at our dining room table, opened my laptop, and pulled up my email. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for maybe 10 seconds before I started typing. The email to Richard was short and to the point. "Richard, I'll take the Singapore offer. If the 2-week notice period works for you, I can start the transition immediately. Let me know the next steps. Thanks, Marcus." I read it over once, twice, then hit send before I could second-guess myself. The whoosh sound of the email sending felt like the starting gun at a race, and suddenly my heart was pounding in my chest. I'd just accepted a job on the other side of the world without discussing it with my wife, which technically made me a terrible husband. But then again, she'd been having what was essentially an emotional affair with her ex-husband for 3 months without really considering my feelings. So I figured we were about even in the terrible spouse department. When Sienna came out of the bathroom 20 minutes later, hair wrapped in a towel and wearing her bathrobe, she found me still sitting at the dining room table with my laptop open. "What are you doing?" she asked, walking past me toward the kitchen. There was something so casual about the question, like she was asking what I wanted for dinner or if I'd remembered to take out the trash. No concern, no real interest, just baseline spousal obligation to acknowledge my existence. "Career therapy," I said, and I couldn't help the slight smile that crossed my face. Just accepted a new job. You should probably think about crashing at your mom's place tonight. Or hey, maybe Blake's got a spare room since you two are so spiritually connected and everything. I kept my tone light, conversational even, like I was suggesting we try a new restaurant instead of essentially announcing the end of our marriage. The change in her expression was instantaneous and honestly pretty satisfying. Her eyes went wide, her mouth literally dropped open like in a cartoon, and she just stood there frozen halfway between the bathroom and the kitchen. What? The word came out strangled, like she couldn't quite process what she was hearing. What are you talking about? Singapore, I said simply, closing my laptop and leaning back in my chair. I'm taking the Singapore position. 2 weeks notice, and then I'm out. And since you said this morning that if I can't handle your ex-husband situation, then maybe we're not right for each other. I'm just agreeing with you. We're not right for each other. Problem solved. Are you seriously ending our marriage over this? She asked, and her voice had gone up about 3 octaves. The towel on her head was starting to slip, and she hadn't even noticed. Over me trying to help someone who's going through a hard time? Are you actually that selfish? I stood up, grabbed my laptop, and looked at her dead in the eye. You said it yourself, Sienna. We're not right for each other. I'm just the first one to actually do something about it. And for the record, this isn't about me being selfish. This is about me finally choosing myself after months of you choosing him. Her mascara, which she'd carefully applied that morning for her brunch date, hadn't even fully dried before she started yelling. You'll regret this, Marcus. You're making a huge mistake. She was following me toward our bedroom now, her voice getting louder with each step. I paused at the bedroom door and turned back to her. You know what? I really don't think I will. And honestly, I meant it. That Tuesday morning email to Richard wasn't just a career decision. It was a declaration of independence, my own personal 4th of July except instead of fireworks. I had a rapidly improving salary package and an exit strategy. While Sienna was busy in the bathroom applying her war paint for what I can only assume was another emotionally intense brunch session with Blake, I was sitting at the dining room table with my laptop open, feeling more alive than I had in months. It's funny how clarity hits you sometimes. 1 minute you're drowning in confusion and self-doubt, wondering if you're the crazy one, and the next minute everything just clicks into place like a perfectly solved Rubik's Cube. I could hear Sienna in the bathroom, the familiar sounds of her makeup routine playing out like a symphony I'd heard 1,000 times before. The click of her mascara tube opening, the soft brush of her makeup brush against her face, the little satisfied hum she made when her eyeliner came out perfectly symmetrical. She was taking her time, really committing to the look, which told me everything I needed to know about how important this particular meeting with Blake was. When she finally emerged from the bathroom, she looked like she was heading to a wedding, not a casual coffee chat with someone who was supposedly just seeking closure. What are you doing? She asked, pausing by the dining room table where I was still sitting with my laptop. She had that slight edge to her voice, the one that suggested she was mildly annoyed that I was still home and not already at work, clearing the path for her guilt-free exit to Blake's emotional rescue mission. Career therapy, I said, and I couldn't keep the smirk off my face. The phrase just came out, smooth and sarcastic, and it felt perfect. Just took a new job, actually. You should probably start thinking about crashing at your mom's place tonight. Or better yet, maybe Blake's got a spare room since you two are so spiritually connected and everything. I hear emotional closure works better when you're under the same roof. Her hand, which had been reaching for her purse on the counter, froze midair. It was like someone had hit pause on a remote control. Her perfectly made-up face went through about 17 different expressions in the span of 3 seconds. Confusion, disbelief, anger, panic, and finally settling on something that looked like genuine shock. What? She managed to get out, her voice climbing an octave. What are you talking about? I'm taking the Singapore job, I said, closing my laptop with a satisfying click. The one I've turned down twice because you said you couldn't possibly leave your family. The $145,000 one with the apartment that has a view so nice it makes grown men cry. That job. I accepted it about 20 minutes ago while you were doing your makeup for Blake. The color drained from her face so fast I almost felt bad for her. Almost. Marcus, you can't be serious right now. You're making a major life decision because you're upset about you choosing your ex-husband over me for 3 straight months? I interrupted, standing up from the table. Yeah, actually I am. See, this morning you said something really profound. You said if I can't handle you spending weekends with your ex-husband, maybe we're not right for each other. And you know what? You're absolutely right. We're not right for each other. So I'm just agreeing with your very accurate assessment of our relationship. She set her purse down, and I noticed her hands were shaking slightly. Are you seriously ending our marriage over this? Her voice cracked a little on the word marriage, and for a split second, I saw actual vulnerability flash across her face. Over me trying to help someone who's going through a difficult time? The audacity of that statement almost made me laugh. Help someone? Sienna, you've been on a 3-month romantic reunion tour disguised as therapy sessions. You get dressed up like you're going on dates. You spend entire weekends with him. You use our money to fund your little emotional affair. And then you have the nerve to make me feel like I'm the crazy one for having a problem with it. So yeah, I'm ending our marriage. Or more accurately, you ended it weeks ago, and I'm just filing the paperwork. This is insane, she practically shouted. And now her carefully applied mascara was starting to run a little as tears formed in her eyes. You're throwing away 3 years of marriage because you're jealous and insecure. I'm choosing myself. I corrected her, grabbing my coffee mug and walking toward the kitchen. There's a difference. For 3 months, you've been choosing Blake. Every weekend, every brunch, every art therapy session, or whatever ridiculous excuse you came up with. You chose him. And when I brought up Singapore, you shut it down immediately because it would inconvenience you. So now I'm choosing me, and I'm choosing Singapore, and honestly, it feels pretty damn good. She followed me into the kitchen, her heels clicking urgently against our hardwood floors. Marcus, we can talk about this. We can work through this. I'll stop seeing Blake if it bothers you that much. We can go to couples therapy. We can. Save it, I said, holding up my hand. You had 3 months to care about how this affected me. 3 months to notice that your husband was becoming a stranger in his own marriage. 3 months to choose us over him. And you didn't. So now it's too late. I gave my boss my 2-week notice. I'm taking the job. And you can spend all the time you want with Blake now because I won't be here to be the third wheel in my own marriage. Her jaw dropped so far I thought it might actually unhinge. You already gave notice? Without even discussing it with me? The irony of her being upset about me making a decision without her input, after she'd made countless decisions about Blake without my input, was almost too perfect. Yep, I said cheerfully, rinsing out my coffee mug. Sent the email while you were curling your hair for your ex-husband. Seemed like the right time since you were busy with your morning Blake preparation ritual. You'll regret this, she yelled, and now the tears were flowing freely, taking her mascara with them. You're going to realize you made a huge mistake, and I won't be here when you come crawling back. I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, no regret. Just a calm, peaceful certainty that I was doing the right thing. Sienna, the only thing I regret is not doing this sooner. Have fun at brunch. Tell Blake I said congratulations. He won. He can have you and all your emotional baggage. She opened her mouth to say something else, probably another threat or guilt trip, but I was already walking toward our bedroom. I'm packing some essentials and staying at a hotel tonight. I called over my shoulder. You can have the apartment until the lease is up. Consider it my parting gift. I could hear her sobbing in the kitchen, but I didn't turn around. I walked into our bedroom, pulled my suitcase out of the closet, and started throwing clothes into it with zero care for organization or wrinkle prevention. T-shirts, jeans, suits, shoes. Everything went in like I was speedrunning a packing competition. My laptop bag, my toiletries, my phone charger, all the essentials for starting your new life when your old one spontaneously combusts. 20 minutes later, I was walking out of our apartment with my suitcase rolling behind me, and Sienna was still in the kitchen, mascara running down her face, phone in her hand, probably texting Blake about the dramatic turn of events. She looked up as I passed, her mouth opening like she wanted to say something, but I just kept walking. The door closing behind me was one of the most satisfying sounds I'd ever heard. As I loaded my suitcase into my car, my phone buzzed. A text from Richard. Fantastic news, Marcus. Welcome to the Singapore team. I'll have HR send over the relocation package details by end of day. This is going to be great. I sat in my car for a minute, staring at that text message, and allowed myself a genuine smile. For the first time in 3 months, I felt like I could actually breathe. No more weekend Blake festivals. No more emotional closure excuses. No more feeling like a side character in my own marriage. I started the car, pulled out of the parking spot, and didn't look back at the apartment. Spoiler alert, I never regretted it. Not even for a second. 20 minutes after I walked out of that apartment, my phone started blowing up like I'd just won the lottery or announced I was running for president. Except instead of congratulations, it was Sienna attempting what I can only describe as a hostage negotiation via text message. The first one came through while I was sitting in a Starbucks parking lot, trying to process the fact that I'd just nuked my entire marriage in the span of one morning. My phone buzzed, and I looked down to see her name on the screen. Marcus, we can talk about this. I stared at that message for a solid 30 seconds, watching the little dots appear and disappear as she typed, deleted, and retyped whatever was coming next. The dots stopped. Another message came through. Marcus, I'll stop seeing him. I promise. We can work this out. Then another one, barely 10 seconds later. Marcus, this is childish. You're acting like a child throwing a tantrum. I had to laugh at that last one. I was being childish. I was the one acting immature. Not the woman who'd spent 3 months playing house with her ex-husband while gaslighting her current husband into thinking he was the problem. The audacity was almost impressive. I took a sip of my overpriced latte and watched the messages continue to roll in, one after another, each one more desperate than the last. We've been together for 3 years. You're going to throw that away. I love you. Doesn't that mean anything? Blake means nothing to me. It was just closure. I'm done with him now. The thing about damage control is that it only works if the other person actually cares about salvaging what's being damaged. And sitting there in that Starbucks parking lot, watching my phone light up with increasingly frantic messages, I realized I genuinely didn't care anymore. That ship hadn't just sailed. It had left the harbor, crossed the ocean, and was probably halfway to Singapore by now, which felt poetically appropriate. I didn't reply to any of them. Instead, I opened my email and started looking at the relocation package details Richard's assistant had already sent over. Business class flight to Singapore, $5,000 relocation allowance, temporary corporate housing for the first month while I found my own place, and a signing bonus that was more than I'd made in the last 6 months combined. I was too busy choosing between the business class seats with extra legroom versus the ones closer to the bathrooms to worry about Sienna's sudden crisis of conscience. By evening, the text messages had slowed down, and I figured maybe she'd finally gotten the hint that I wasn't interested in her too little too late apology tour. I checked into a hotel, nothing fancy, just a Holiday Inn Express that offered free breakfast and Wi-Fi that actually worked, and was settling in to watch some mindless TV when my phone buzzed with a notification. Instagram. Sienna had posted a story. Curiosity got the better of me, and I clicked on it. There she was, sitting on what was very clearly Blake's balcony. I recognized it from the photos he'd posted months ago when he first moved back to town, holding a coffee mug and staring pensively into the distance like she was the star of some indie drama film. The caption read, "When life gives you curveballs, drink coffee." I actually laughed out loud. The woman had literally just lost her marriage because she couldn't stop seeing her ex-husband, and her immediate response was to run to said ex-husband's apartment and post about it on social media. The lack of self-awareness was genuinely breathtaking. But wait, it gets better. Within minutes of her posting that story, my phone lit up with a text from Tara, one of Sienna's friends who had the loyalty of a hungry raccoon and the subtlety of a car alarm. Tara and I had never particularly liked each other. She was one of those people who thought being brutally honest was a personality trait instead of just being rude, but she always kept tabs on everyone's drama like it was her job. "Did you really move out?" her text read, and I could practically hear the gossip-hungry excitement in her digital voice. "Not yet," I replied, because technically I was just staying at a hotel. "But I'm packing faster than Amazon Prime, so give it a couple days." I could see the dots bouncing immediately as she typed her response. "Sienna's at Blake's place. Just FYI. Yeah, I saw the Instagram story," I wrote back. "Thanks for the update though. Real friend of the year material there, Tara." She sent back a shrugging emoji, which pretty much summed up her entire approach to friendship. I was about to put my phone down and get back to my TV show when another text came through, this time from my buddy Leo. Leo was one of those genuinely good friends who'd been with me through thick and thin, and he happened to work at the same gym where Blake was a member. This was about to get interesting. "Dude," his text started, which is never a good sign. You need to see this. Attached to the message were screenshots from what appeared to be a group chat. Blake's name was at the top, and the messages were from earlier that day. I zoomed in and started reading, and with each line, my blood pressure dropped while my satisfaction level skyrocketed. Blake. Yeah, she's practically single now. Meeting up with her later. Blake. Her husband's completely clueless. Dude has no idea what's going on. Blake. She said he's being all weird about us hanging out. Like, bro, we're just catching up face with tears of joy. Blake. Captain Oblivious over there probably thinks we're doing Bible study or some shit. There it was, in digital black and white. Blake calling me Captain Oblivious, laughing about the situation with his gym buddies, bragging about how he was essentially having an affair with my wife while I played the fool. The thing is, I wasn't even mad. I was vindicated. This was exactly the confirmation I needed that every instinct I'd had over the past 3 months was dead on accurate. Leo, you're a legend. I texted back. Can you send me the full screenshots? Already did. Thought you might need them. I saved those screenshots like they were precious artifacts, because honestly, they kind of were. Then I did something that probably wasn't my most mature moment, but it felt absolutely necessary. I opened my text conversation with Sienna, attached the screenshots, and sent them with a single word, curious. The response was immediate. My phone started ringing within 30 seconds, Sienna's name flashing on the screen. I let it ring. Then she called again. I let that one go to voicemail too. Then came the text messages, rapid fire like she was trying to set some kind of speed typing record. Where did you get those? Those are out of context. Marcus, answer your phone. This isn't what it looks like. Blake was joking around with his friends. That's how guys talk. You're taking this completely the wrong way. I screenshot her messages too, just for the collection, and then I did something I should have done weeks ago. I muted her notifications. Not blocked, because I figured I'd probably need to communicate with her about divorce logistics eventually, but muted so I could have some actual peace and quiet without my phone having a seizure every 5 minutes. Then I forwarded the screenshots to Tara with a simple message. Since you seem interested in the drama, here's the full story. Blake's been playing both of us. Thought you should know what kind of person your girl's been spending all her time with. Was it petty? Absolutely. Did it feel amazing? You bet your ass it did. Within an hour, Tara had apparently shared those screenshots with her entire friend group, because I started getting texts from people I barely knew, friends of friends who'd heard about the situation and wanted to share their opinions. Most of them were surprisingly supportive, with messages like, dude, you dodged a bullet, and Sienna's crazy, you're better off. My personal favorite came from Noah, who'd been skeptical about the whole situation from the beginning. His text was simple and perfect. Told you closure doesn't take 6 weekends and a bottle of wine. Welcome to the other side, brother. First round's on me. I looked at the pile of screenshots on my phone, the evidence of Sienna's emotional affair and Blake's smugness all neatly documented like a case file. Then I looked at the email from Richard with my Singapore relocation details, the hotel room I was sitting in, and the life I was about to start building without the weight of a failing marriage dragging me down. My phone buzzed one more time. Another text from Sienna. We need to talk face to face. This is our marriage. I typed back 4 words. Was. Past tense. Goodbye. Then I opened my laptop, started researching apartments in Singapore, and planned my new life. Behind me, my phone kept buzzing with notifications, but I didn't even look. I was too busy choosing between a downtown apartment with a view of Marina Bay or a slightly cheaper place near the business district. Some decisions are harder than others, but walking away from Sienna? That was turning out to be the easiest decision I'd made in years. The next Saturday rolled around, and I'd officially designated it as my packing day, which sounds way more organized than it actually was. Realistically, I was just going back to the apartment to grab the rest of my stuff while Sienna was supposed to be out doing whatever it is that recently separated women do on Saturday mornings. Probably brunch with Blake, except now that I'd exposed their little situation to half the internet, maybe that particular tradition was on hold. I was hoping for a clean in-and-out operation. Show up, grab my Xbox, my good kitchen knives that I'd brought into the marriage, maybe that vintage record player my dad gave me, and peace out before any drama could unfold. Naturally, the universe had other plans, because when I pulled up to the apartment building, I saw not 1, not 2, but 3 cars parked in visitor spots that I recognized immediately. Sienna's car, Her mother Janet's pristine white Lexus that she treated like a firstborn child, and her brother Mason's obnoxiously lifted truck that compensated for pretty much everything you'd expect it to compensate for. My stomach dropped. This wasn't going to be a simple packing day. This was going to be an intervention, and I was the interventionee. I sat in my car for a solid 5 minutes, seriously contemplating just driving away and hiring professional movers to deal with this mess. But then I remembered that my signed first edition of The Great Gatsby was in there, and there was no way I was leaving that behind for Sienna to use as a coaster or whatever. So I took a deep breath, grabbed my empty duffel bags from the trunk, and walked up to the apartment like a man heading to his own execution, except the executioner was his mother-in-law and the method was death by judgment. I unlocked the door and walked in to find all three of them sitting in my living room like they were staging some kind of daytime talk show intervention episode. Janet was perched on the edge of the couch, hands folded in her lap, wearing what I called her serious conversation outfit, a blazer and slacks combo that screamed, "I'm about to tell you how disappointed I am in your life choices." Mason was standing by the window with his arms crossed, trying to look intimidating, which might have worked if he wasn't wearing a tank top that said Gym Life and hadn't skipped leg day for approximately his entire life. And Sienna was sitting in the armchair, eyes red and puffy, playing the victim role like she was auditioning for an Oscar. "Marcus," Janet started, and oh boy, here we go. She had that tone in her voice, the one that mothers-in-law use when they're about to lecture you about something they know absolutely nothing about. "Honey, Sienna told us everything, and we're very concerned about you. This decision to move abroad, to just abandon your marriage, it's clearly a cry for help. We think you might be having some kind of midlife crisis." I actually had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. A midlife crisis. At 32. Because apparently, the only logical explanation for a man leaving his wife who was having an emotional affair with her ex-husband was mental instability. "Janet," I said, setting my duffel bags down by the door, "I appreciate your concern, but this isn't a midlife crisis. A midlife crisis is buying a sports car you can't afford or getting a bad tattoo. This is just me accepting a better job with better pay in a better location." "Better location?" Mason interjected, puffing out his chest like a rooster who'd just learned to talk. "You're abandoning your wife, your family, your entire life here. Real men don't just run away when things get tough." The irony of Mason lecturing me about being a real man when he still lived in his mom's basement at age 28 and had been fired from 3 jobs in the past 2 years for personality conflicts wasn't lost on me. "You're right, Mason," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Real men stay in marriages where their wives spend every weekend with their ex-husbands. That's definitely the alpha male move." Sienna made a sound that was half sob, half gasp. "Marcus, that's not fair. You're making it sound so much worse than it was." "Am I, though?" I walked further into the apartment, heading toward the bedroom to start packing. "Because from where I'm standing, you spent 3 months prioritizing Blake's emotional needs over our marriage, and when I finally called you out on it, you told me maybe we weren't right for each other. So I agreed. That's not me making it worse. That's literally what happened." Janet stood up, following me toward the bedroom like she wasn't going to let this go. "Marcus, every marriage has rough patches. You work through them. You don't just give up and move to another country. What about counseling? What about trying to fix this?" I stopped in the doorway and turned to face her. "Janet, with all due respect, Sienna had 3 months to suggest counseling. 3 months to pump the brakes on her Blake reunion tour. 3 months to choose our marriage. She didn't. So now I'm choosing myself, and that includes accepting a job that pays $145,000 a year, comes with housing, and gives me a fresh start somewhere that doesn't involve weekend brunch drama." "It's about the money then?" Mason said from behind me, and I could hear the judgment in his voice. "You're really that shallow?" I turned around slowly, and I could feel my patience wearing thinner than the plot of a reality TV show. "No, Mason, it's not about the money. It's about respect. It's about being in a relationship where I'm actually a priority instead of an afterthought. It's about not feeling like a third wheel in my own marriage. But sure, the $145,000 and the view of the Singapore skyline don't hurt." That's when I pulled out my phone and opened up the screenshots Leo had sent me. The ones with Blake calling me Captain Oblivious, bragging about how clueless I was, laughing about the situation with his buddies. I pulled them up on my phone and held it out toward Janet. Here, since Sienna apparently gave you her version of events, let me show you what was actually happening. Janet took my phone, her reading glasses already hanging around her neck on one of those beaded chains. She put them on and started reading, her eyes moving back and forth across the screen. I watched her expression change from defensive to confused to shocked to absolutely mortified. Her mouth literally fell open. It was like watching someone's entire worldview collapse in real time. These are, she started, then stopped, scrolling down to read more. Blake wrote these? About you? While he was having what was essentially an emotional affair with your daughter. Yeah, that's exactly what was happening. And when I tried to bring it up, I was told I was being insecure and jealous. So excuse me if I'm not super interested in counseling to save a marriage where I was being actively disrespected and mocked behind my back. Sienna jumped up from the armchair, her face going red. Those are out of context. Blake was just joking around with his friends. That's how guys talk. That's how guys talk about women they're sleeping with, Sienna, I said flatly. Not about the husbands of women they're just getting closure with. There's a difference. The room went absolutely silent. You could have heard a pin drop, or in this case, you could hear Mason's jaw hitting the floor. Janet slowly handed my phone back to me, and when I looked at her face, I could see the gears turning. She was realizing that maybe, just maybe, her precious daughter wasn't the innocent victim in this story. Marcus, Janet said quietly, and her tone had completely changed. The judgment was gone, replaced with something that sounded almost like understanding. I didn't know it was like this. Yeah, well, now you do, I said, pocketing my phone. And just so we're clear, I didn't abandon Sienna. I honored her request. She said if I couldn't handle her relationship with Blake, maybe we weren't right for each other. I simply agreed with her assessment and acted accordingly. That's not abandonment. That's called consent. Mason, who'd been suspiciously quiet during the screenshot revelation, finally spoke up, though his voice had lost all its earlier bravado. But you guys have been together for 3 years. You're just going to throw that away. I'm not throwing anything away, I said, walking past him into the bedroom to start actually packing. I'm just refusing to be plan B in my own marriage. Sienna chose Blake for 3 months straight. Now I'm choosing Singapore. Fair's fair. I started pulling clothes out of the closet, shoving them into my duffel bag with zero regard for organization. Suits, casual shirts, jeans, everything was getting crammed in because I just wanted to get out of there before this turned into an even bigger circus than it already was. Behind me, I could hear whispered arguing, Sienna trying to explain herself to her mother, Janet asking questions in that low, disappointed tone that mothers are so good at. Mason probably just standing there trying to figure out what just happened. After about 10 minutes of furious packing and uncomfortable silence broken only by whispered family drama, Janet appeared in the bedroom doorway. Marcus, I think we should go. I'm sorry we ambushed you like this. If I'd known the full situation. It's fine, Janet, I said, and I actually meant it. You were trying to help your daughter. I get it. But the marriage is over. Sienna made her choice, and I made mine. No amount of intervention is going to change that. She nodded slowly, then reached out and squeezed my shoulder. For what it's worth, I think she made a terrible mistake. And I'm sorry you were put in this position. Thanks, I said, genuinely surprised by her support. That actually means a lot. They left about 5 minutes later, all 3 of them filing out of the apartment like mourners leaving a funeral. Sienna tried to catch my eye as she left, her face streaked with tears, but I just kept packing. I heard the door close, the lock click, and then finally, bless silence. I walked over to the liquor cabinet, pulled out the bottle of whiskey I'd been saving for a special occasion, and poured myself a generous glass. Then I raised it in a toast to the empty apartment. To new beginnings, I said out loud. And to packing being way more fun when your ex-wife's entire family just got hit with a reality check. The whiskey burned going down, but in a good way. I took another sip, set the glass down, and got back to packing. Singapore was waiting, and I had exactly 8 days left before my flight. 8 days until I could close this chapter and start fresh, and honestly, I couldn't wait. The morning of my flight to Singapore felt surreal in the best possible way. I woke up at 4 a.m. in my hotel room, not because my alarm went off, but because I was genuinely too excited to sleep. It's funny how your body works. 3 months of marriage stress had me sleeping like garbage, tossing and turning every night, waking up exhausted. But the night before the biggest life change I'd ever made, I slept like a baby who'd just discovered naps were optional, and woke up feeling like I'd chugged 3 espressos and won the lottery. I got dressed, double-checked my passport approximately 17 times like it might spontaneously disappear, and loaded my luggage into my Uber. The driver was this cheerful guy named Ahmed who immediately noticed my above-average number of suitcases and asked if I was moving. Singapore, I told him, and just saying it out loud made it feel real. Starting fresh. Good for you, man, Ahmed said, pulling out of the hotel parking lot. Life's too short to stay somewhere you're not happy. If only he knew how right he was. We made small talk about Singapore. He'd been there once for a wedding and couldn't stop raving about the food, and before I knew it, we were pulling up to the airport. I tipped him extra because his enthusiasm about my fresh start had genuinely made my morning even better, grabbed my bags, and walked into the terminal feeling like the protagonist in one of those inspirational movies where the guy finally gets his life together. After I checked my bags and got through security, I found myself sitting at my gate with about an hour to kill before boarding. That's when I decided to do something that was probably petty but felt absolutely necessary. I pulled out my phone, opened Instagram, and took a selfie right there in the terminal. Nothing fancy, just me with my boarding pass visible, the gate number clear in the background, and a genuine smile on my face. I posted it with the caption, "New chapter begins, Singapore bound." The comments started rolling in within minutes, and it was like watching a live feed of everyone's reactions to my life implosion. Most people had no idea what had happened. I kept my marriage drama relatively private until this point, so the responses were a mix of confusion and congratulations. "Wait, what happened?" wrote my college roommate Dave. "Didn't your wife say she'd never let you go?" commented Sarah from my old job. That one made me laugh out loud. "She didn't let me go," I typed back. "That's why I left." Short, simple, and perfectly accurate. Then came the messages from people who'd clearly heard about the situation through the grapevine. The mutual friends, the acquaintances, the people who knew both me and Sienna and had been watching this train wreck unfold from a safe distance. "Bro, good for you. You deserve better," wrote Marcus. Different Marcus, confusing I know. "Best decision you ever made." "Trust me," said Kelly, who'd gone through her own messy divorce 2 years ago. My personal favorite came from Noah, who just commented with 3 emojis, a plane, a middle finger, and a champagne glass. Subtle? No. Accurate? Absolutely. I was scrolling through the comments, genuinely entertained by the support, when my phone buzzed with a text message. I looked at the name on the screen and felt my good mood dip slightly. Sienna. Of course. Because apparently, even my departure day couldn't be drama-free. "What's your weekend like?" the message read, and I had to admire the audacity. She was really trying to play it casual, like I hadn't just publicly announced my permanent relocation to another continent. Like we were still married, and this was just a normal Saturday morning check-in. I thought about ignoring it. I really did. But something about being in that airport, literally about to board a plane that would take me 9,000 miles away from all this nonsense, made me feel bold. So I opened my camera, took another selfie, this time making sure to get the giant Changi Airport, Singapore sign clearly visible in the background, and sent it to her with the caption, "No X's, just upgrades." The typing bubbles appeared almost immediately. Disappeared. Appeared again. Disappeared. I could practically see her on the other end, typing and deleting, trying to figure out what to say to that. Finally, a message came through. "This isn't funny." I typed back quickly, my fingers flying across the screen. "Not a joke. Currently at gate C12. Boarding in 45 minutes. But hey, you've got plenty of time to grab brunch with Blake now." Silver lining. She tried calling. The phone rang in my hand, her name flashing on the screen along with that photo of us from our honeymoon that I still hadn't bothered to change. I watched it ring once, twice, 3 times, and then I did something that felt incredibly empowering. I declined the call and immediately turned my phone to airplane mode. Done. Finished. The Sienna chapter of my life was officially closed. I leaned back in my uncomfortable airport chair and let out a long breath. Around me, the gate area was filling up with other Singapore-bound passengers, businessmen in suits typing frantically on laptops, families with young kids who were already causing chaos, a group of college students who looked like they were heading out for study abroad. All these people starting their own journeys, and here I was, 32 years old, starting completely over. They called my boarding group about 30 minutes later, and I gathered my carry-on and laptop bag with this weird mix of excitement and relief washing over me. I handed my boarding pass to the gate agent, walked down the jetway, and stepped onto the plane. Business class, window seat, 14A. I'd splurged on the upgrade using some of my signing bonus, because if you're going to fly halfway across the world to escape your failed marriage, you might as well do it in comfort. The flight attendant, a friendly woman named Michelle, greeted me with a warm smile. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Lane. Heading home or heading out?" "Heading out," I said, settling into my seat. "Fresh start." "Well, you picked a beautiful city for it," she said. "Can I get you anything before takeoff?" "Champagne." "Absolutely," I said, because honestly, champagne at 8 a.m. on a Saturday seemed like exactly the right way to celebrate escaping a toxic marriage. She brought me a glass a few minutes later, and I took a sip, savoring the bubbles and the moment. The plane was still boarding, people shuffling past to their seats, overhead bins slamming shut, the usual pre-flight chaos. But I felt completely at peace. I pulled out my phone, still on airplane mode, and scrolled through the Instagram comments one more time. They were still coming in, even though I couldn't see the new ones with my phone offline. The last comment I saw before I put my phone away was from my buddy Chris. Meanwhile, Blake's probably realizing he won the booby prize. "Have fun in Singapore, King." That made me smile. I put my phone in my pocket, took another sip of champagne, and looked out the window at the tarmac. The ground crew was loading luggage, fueling the plane, doing all the pre-flight checks that happen before a massive aircraft hurls itself across an ocean. About 20 minutes later, we started pulling back from the gate. The captain came over the intercom with the standard welcome speech, flight time, altitude, weather in Singapore, and I felt the plane start to move. We taxied toward the runway, the engines getting louder, and then suddenly we were accelerating, faster and faster until the nose lifted and we were airborne. I watched my city get smaller below me, the buildings and roads and familiar landmarks shrinking into a miniature version of themselves. Somewhere down there was the apartment I'd shared with Sienna, the office where I'd worked for the past 5 years, the coffee shop where I'd had that conversation with Noah about closure not taking 6 weekends. All of it getting smaller and smaller until it disappeared completely beneath the clouds. There was some turbulence about an hour into the flight, the plane bouncing around a bit, the seatbelt sign dinging back on. The woman across the aisle gripped her armrests and looked genuinely terrified. But honestly, after the past 3 months of emotional turbulence, a little physical turbulence felt like nothing. I just took another sip of my second glass of champagne and thought about how this rough air was still smoother than my marriage had been. Michelle came by to check on everyone, her professional smile still in place despite the bumpy ride. "Doing okay, Mr. Lane?" "Never better," I said, and I meant it. The turbulence smoothed out after about 15 minutes, and the flight settled into that comfortable rhythm of long-haul travel. I reclined my seat, pulled out my laptop, and started researching neighborhoods in Singapore. Clark Quay looked cool, very nightlife-oriented. Tiong Bahru had this artsy, hipster vibe. Marina Bay was expensive, but had those insane views I'd been dreaming about. I bookmarked about a dozen apartment listings, made notes about proximity to my new office, calculated commute times, and generally started planning my new life with the kind of enthusiasm I hadn't felt in years. At some point, I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, Michelle was gently touching my shoulder. "Mr. Lane, we're starting our descent into Singapore. You'll want to put your seat upright." I blinked awake, looked out the window, and saw the lights of Singapore sprawled out below us like someone had spilled a box of diamonds across black velvet. It was beautiful. It was overwhelming. It was everything I needed. We landed smoothly, taxied to the gate, and I gathered my things with hands that were actually shaking a little from excitement. As I walked off the plane into Changi Airport, the air conditioning hitting me like a welcome committee, I pulled my phone out of airplane mode. Immediately, messages started flooding in. Sienna had tried calling 14 more times. 14. There were texts from her, from Janet, from Mason, from Tara, from people I barely knew. But I didn't read any of them. Instead, I took one more selfie. Me in the Singapore airport, with the iconic butterfly garden visible in the background, and posted it with one word: arrived. Then I muted my phone, grabbed my luggage from baggage claim, and walked out into my new life. No exes, no drama, just me, Singapore, and unlimited possibilities. Singapore was everything I'd hoped for, and then some. Calling it paradise feels cliché, but honestly, that's the only word that fits. My apartment was on the 23rd floor of a sleek modern building in the Marina Bay area, with floor-to-ceiling glass walls that gave me a view of the city skyline that looked like someone had photoshopped it for being too perfect. Every morning I'd wake up, make coffee, and stand at those windows watching the sun rise over the city, and I'd think about how just a month ago I was waking up to Sienna getting dressed for another Blake brunch date. The upgrade was almost comical. Work was incredible too. The Singapore office was newer, more innovative, and frankly just more excited about what they were doing than the folks back home. My team actually wanted to be there, which was a refreshing change from the soul-crushing apathy that had defined my old workplace. Plus, the salary bump meant I could actually afford to enjoy the city. I tried Hawker Center food that cost $3 and tasted better than $50 restaurant meals back home, explored gardens by the bay on weekends, and generally lived like someone who'd just escaped prison and was seeing colors for the first time. The air quality alone was worth the move. I'm not even joking. The air in Singapore was so clean it made me feel like my lungs were getting a spa treatment every time I breathed. My soul felt filtered, purified, like I'd run myself through some kind of human breed system and come out the other side actually functional. Life was peaceful. Work was great. I'd made a few friends, other expats who understood the weird limbo of starting over in a new country. Everything was going almost suspiciously well, which should have been my first clue that the universe was about to deliver some entertainment. It started with Sienna's online meltdown, which I only knew about because my buddy Noah sent me screenshots with a message that just said, "Bro, you gotta see this." I was sitting in a coffee shop near my apartment, enjoying an iced latte that cost less than a sneeze when I opened the images he'd sent. Sienna had posted on Facebook, not Instagram where it might get buried, but Facebook where all the aunts and uncles and family friends could see, with a caption that read, "When your husband chooses money over love. Some people show you who they really are when things get hard. Grateful for the people who stuck by me through this difficult time. Broken heart." I had to read it twice because the audacity was genuinely breathtaking. She was really out here playing the victim, painting me as some gold digger who'd abandoned our sacred union for a paycheck, completely ignoring the 3-month Blake festival that had actually ended our marriage. The post had dozens of comments, and Noah had thoughtfully screenshot those too. But here's where it got good. The comments section was not going the way Sienna had apparently hoped. Instead of a sympathy parade, it was more like a reality check convention. Someone named Jennifer had written, "Girl, weren't you having brunch with your ex-husband every weekend? I saw the Instagram stories." Another comment from someone called Mark, "Money over love? Didn't he ask you to move to Singapore with him, and you said no because of Blake?" And my personal favorite, from a woman named Patricia who I vaguely remembered meeting at one of Sienna's family gatherings. "He upgraded. Let him live." I actually laughed out loud in the coffee shop, causing several people to look at me like I'd lost my mind. The barista gave me a concerned smile, probably wondering if I was okay. I wanted to show her the screenshots and be like, my ex-wife is getting roasted in her own comment section, but that felt like it might be oversharing with someone who was just trying to make lattes. Noah sent another message. "It gets better. Keep scrolling." I scrolled to the next screenshot, and that's when I saw that karma hadn't just showed up. It had arrived in a limousine wearing a ball gown and carrying receipts. Someone had tagged Blake's new girlfriend Sophie in the comments. Apparently, Sophie and Sienna had mutual friends because Sophie had seen the post and decided to contribute to the conversation. Sophie had written, "Interesting perspective. Blake told me you were obsessed with him and wouldn't leave him alone. Said you were using closure as an excuse to try to rekindle things. That's not true, right?" The comment had been posted 2 hours ago, and there were no replies from Sienna. Radio silence. The kind of silence that speaks volumes, the kind that basically confirms everything without actually confirming anything. But Sophie wasn't done. Oh no, Sophie was just getting started. Noah's next screenshot showed that Sophie had made her own post, a public one, with screenshots of the exact same messages Leo had sent me. Blake's group chat where he'd called me Captain Oblivious, bragged about Sienna being practically single, the whole damning conversation laid out in glorious high definition. Sophie's caption was chef's kiss perfect. PSA: if a guy tells you his ex-wife's husband is clueless about their friendship, maybe ask yourself what exactly they're friends about. Consider this a public service announcement. Hashtag weekend therapy fail. Hashtag closure is canceled. The post had already gotten over 200 likes and was being shared like wildfire. People were tagging Sienna. People were tagging Blake. It was a full-blown social media disaster, and I was sitting in a Singapore coffee shop watching it unfold in real time like it was the season finale of my favorite show. I sent Noah a message. You've made my entire week. Possibly my entire month. He replied, Karma's a beautiful thing, my friend. Also, Blake and Sienna both deleted their social media. They've gone dark. I ordered another iced latte to celebrate. The barista asked if I was celebrating something, and I said, poetic justice, which probably confused her, but she smiled anyway and gave me an extra shot of espresso for free. Over the next few days, I heard through the grapevine, mainly Noah and Leo, who were feeding me updates like I was watching a reality show, that the fallout had been spectacular. Blake had apparently tried to do damage control by posting some generic statement about misunderstandings and taking things out of context, but it was too late. The screenshots were everywhere. His gym buddies had seen them. His coworkers had seen them. His family had definitely seen them. Sienna had gone completely silent online. No posts, no stories, no likes or comments. It was like she'd been digitally raptured. According to Tara, who'd apparently switched sides and was now Team Marcus, loyalty of a raccoon, remember? Sienna was going through a really hard time and couldn't believe people were being so cruel. The lack of self-awareness was almost impressive. She couldn't believe people were being cruel. She'd spent 3 months having an emotional affair, gaslighting me about it, and then tried to play the victim when I left. And now she was shocked that the internet wasn't buying her sob story? Leo sent me a message one evening. Dude, Blake showed up at the gym today, and everyone was giving him the cold shoulder. Someone literally called him Weekend Blake to his face. He left after 10 minutes. Weekend Blake. The nickname had stuck. I loved everything about that. But the absolute cherry on top of this Karma Sunday came about 2 weeks after Sophie's post went viral. I was at my apartment, working from home for the day, when I got a message from an unknown number. Singapore number, which was weird because I hadn't given my new number to many people yet. Hi Marcus, this is Sophie. I hope it's okay that I'm reaching out. I got your number from Leo. I wanted to apologize for my part in all of this mess. I had no idea about the full situation until recently. I stared at that message for a solid minute, trying to figure out if this was real or some kind of elaborate prank. But then more messages came through. Blake told me you and Sienna were basically separated and just hadn't made it official yet. He said she was the one pursuing him, not the other way around. Obviously, the screenshots show a different story. I feel like an idiot. I typed back, you're not an idiot. Blake's a professional liar. Trust me, I lived it for 3 months before I finally woke up. Still, she wrote, I should have asked more questions. Anyway, I broke up with him. Couldn't trust anything he said after seeing those messages. And I thought you should know, he's been telling people that Sienna was crazy and obsessed with him, trying to rewrite history now that he's been exposed. Of course he was. Because guys like Blake never take responsibility. It's always someone else's fault. Always someone else being crazy or obsessed or unreasonable. Thanks for letting me know, I replied. And thanks for posting those screenshots. You have no idea how validating it was to watch karma actually work for once. Happy to help, she wrote back. Also, those posts you made from Singapore? Your life looks amazing. Good for you for getting out. I smiled at that. It really is. Best decision I ever made. We chatted for a few more minutes. She was actually pretty cool, funny, and self-aware in a way that made me wonder what she'd ever seen in Blake in the first place, and then signed off. I sat there in my Singapore apartment, looking out at the skyline as the sun set and the city lights started twinkling on like someone was flipping switches across the entire metropolitan area. Somewhere back home, Sienna and Blake were dealing with the consequences of their actions. Their social media was dark, their reputations were trashed, and they'd become cautionary tales in their own social circles. Meanwhile, I was living in one of the most beautiful cities in the world, making more money than I'd ever made, working a job I actually enjoyed, and watching karma deliver justice so perfectly it could have been scripted. I grabbed my phone and ordered Thai food delivery, Phenomenal pad thai that would arrive in 20 minutes for less than $10. Pulled up Netflix and settled in for a quiet evening. No drama. No emotional affairs. No weekend Blake festivals. Just me, my apartment with the ridiculous view, and the peaceful satisfaction of knowing that sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys actually win. Life was good, and it was only getting better. Just when I thought the Sienna and Blake show had reached its season finale, and I could settle into my peaceful Singapore existence without any more drama, the universe decided to throw me one more plot twist. And let me tell you, this one was a doozy that I absolutely did not see coming, which honestly should have been impossible given how predictable Sienna had become. I'd been in Singapore for about 6 weeks at this point, and I'd fallen into a comfortable routine. Wake up to that incredible skyline view, hit the gym in my building, grab breakfast at the hawker center down the street, head to work, come home, explore the city, or hang out with my new expat friends. It was simple, drama-free, and exactly what I needed. I was literally living my best life, the kind of life that makes people back home scroll through your Instagram and think, damn, he really did that. So naturally, that's when everything went sideways. I was at work, sitting in a meeting about Q4 projections, when my phone buzzed with a call from my building's security desk. I almost ignored it. I was in a meeting, and whatever the security guard needed could probably wait. But something made me excuse myself and take the call in the hallway. Mr. Lane? The security guard's voice sounded uncertain, like he was dealing with a situation he hadn't been trained for. Sir, there's a woman here in the lobby. She says she's your wife, and well, she's crying quite a bit. She's asking to see you. I stood there in the hallway of my Singapore office building, phone pressed to my ear, trying to process what I'd just heard. I'm sorry, what? A woman claiming to be my wife. Yes, sir. She has identification. American passport. Name is Sienna Lane. My blood ran cold. Then hot. Then cold again. Sienna was here. In Singapore. At my building. The mental gymnastics required to make that make sense were Olympic level. How did she even find my address? I asked, more to myself than to the security guard. She said she tracked you through a coworker's Instagram post, sir. Should I send her away? Part of me, the petty part that had been enjoying my drama-free existence, wanted to say yes. Tell her customer service is closed, building's full, try again never. But curiosity got the better of me, combined with a morbid need to understand what could possibly possess someone to fly halfway around the world to ambush their ex-husband. Tell her I'll meet her at the coffee shop across the street in 1 hour, I said. Not in my building. The coffee shop. Understood, sir. I hung up and stood there for a minute, trying to wrap my head around this development. Sienna had flown to Singapore. That was at minimum a 20-hour journey with layovers, costing probably $2,000 in airfare, all to show up at my building and cry in the lobby. The dedication was almost impressive if it wasn't completely unhinged. I went back into my meeting, made my apologies about a family emergency, which technically wasn't a lie, and left work early. The whole taxi ride back to my neighborhood, I was running through scenarios in my head. What could she possibly want? What could she possibly say that would justify this level of dramatic gesture? An hour later, I walked into the coffee shop across from my building and spotted her immediately. She was sitting at a corner table, wearing a gray hoodie and leggings, her hair in a messy bun, no makeup, looking absolutely exhausted. This wasn't the perfectly put-together Sienna who used to spend an hour getting ready for Blake brunches. This was someone who looked like they'd been through an emotional wood chipper. I ordered a black coffee, needed the caffeine for whatever this conversation was about to be, and walked over to her table. She looked up as I approached, and her eyes were red and puffy from crying. Marcus, she said, her voice cracking. Thank you for meeting me. Sienna, I said, sitting down across from her. You flew to Singapore. I feel like thank you is kind of redundant at this point. What are you doing here? She took a shaky breath, wrapping her hands around her own coffee cup like it was a life preserver. I messed up, Marcus. I messed up so badly, and I need you to know that I understand that now. I've had time to think, to really process everything, and I see it clearly now. What I did to you, to us, it was wrong. I took a sip of my coffee and waited. This felt rehearsed, like she'd practiced this speech on the plane. Blake wasn't worth it, she continued, tears starting to fall again. None of it was worth losing you. I thought I could have both. I thought I could support him through his divorce while maintaining our marriage, and I didn't realize how much I was hurting you until it was too late. Which part bothered you most? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Losing me, or getting called out publicly for your emotional affair? She flinched at that. That's not fair. Isn't it though? Because from where I'm sitting, you had 3 months to care about how this affected me. 3 months to choose our marriage over your ex-husband. And you didn't. So forgive me if I'm skeptical about this sudden revelation that happened to occur right after you got dragged on social media. I deserve that, she said quietly. I deserve all of it. But Marcus, I'm here because I love you. I flew across the world because I needed you to see that I'm serious about fixing this. About us. I leaned back in my chair and studied her. She looked genuine. I'll give her that. The tears seemed real. The exhaustion was definitely real. And the desperation in her voice wasn't something you could easily fake. But here's the thing about patterns. Once you see them, you can't unsee them. Let me ask you something, I said. Did you think about calling first? Texting? Having an actual conversation before spending $2,000 on a plane ticket to ambush me? I knew you wouldn't answer, she admitted. You stopped responding to my messages weeks ago. This was the only way to make you listen, right? So this isn't about respecting my boundaries or my decision. This is about you not accepting no for an answer. Again, just like you didn't accept my boundaries about Blake. She opened her mouth to protest, then closed it again. Score 1 for self-awareness, I guess. Marcus, I'm pregnant, she said suddenly, and the words hung in the air between us like a bomb that hadn't quite detonated yet. I actually laughed. I couldn't help it. The absurdity of the statement, combined with the timing, combined with everything else, just made me laugh. Are you serious right now? I said, setting my coffee down. Sienna, we haven't been intimate in over 3 months. The last time was before the Blake Festival even started. Unless your ex-husband's first name is secretly Marcus, I seriously doubt that baby is mine. Her face went bright red. I mean, she stammered, and I could see her brain working overtime to figure out how to salvage this lie. I just thought. I wanted you to care. You wanted me to care, I repeated slowly. So you lied about being pregnant. After flying to Singapore to tell me you've changed. After crying about how much you messed up and how you want to fix things. And your big move was to lie about being pregnant to manipulate me into, what exactly? Taking you back? I panicked, she said, tears flowing harder now. I'm sitting here watching you live this amazing life without me. And I'm back home dealing with the fallout of everything. And I wanted you to feel something. Anything. I stood up, grabbing my coffee. I do feel something, Sienna. I feel relieved that I left when I did. Because this right here, this is exactly the kind of manipulation I've been living without for 6 weeks. And it's been amazing. Marcus, please. No, I said firmly. You flew to Singapore thinking you could what? Cry enough to make me forget 3 months of you choosing Blake over me? Lie about being pregnant to guilt me into reconsidering? That's not love, Sienna. That's desperation, and frankly, it's kind of pathetic. She looked up at me, mascara running down her face despite the fact that she supposedly wasn't wearing makeup. I thought I could have both, she whispered. I thought I was strong enough to support him through his divorce while keeping our marriage together. I didn't think you'd actually leave. That's the problem right there, I said. You didn't think I'd leave. You took me for granted. You assumed I'd always be there, playing second fiddle to whatever Blake needed. And when I finally chose myself, you couldn't handle it. I finished the last of my coffee and set the cup down on the table. I'm going to go now. You should book a flight home. Singapore's beautiful, but I don't think you're really here for the sightseeing. Marcus, please. Can we just talk more? Can you give me another chance? I looked at her one last time, really looked at her, and felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, no lingering affection. Just a complete absence of feeling, like looking at a stranger who happened to know my name. I gave you chances, Sienna. Every weekend you chose Blake. I gave you a chance to choose differently. Every time I brought up how uncomfortable I was, that was a chance. Every conversation about Singapore that you shut down, that was a chance. You had dozens of chances, and you chose wrong every single time. So no, you don't get another one. I walked out of that coffee shop without looking back, crossed the street to my building, and rode the elevator up to my apartment. When I got inside, I stood at those floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the Singapore skyline, and took a deep breath. My phone buzzed. A text from Sienna. I'm sorry. For everything. I looked at the message for a moment, then deleted it without responding. Some apologies are too little, too late, and some bridges are meant to stay burned. I ordered Thai food, pulled up Netflix, and settled into my couch. Tomorrow I'd probably hear through the grapevine that Sienna had flown home. Maybe she'd post something cryptic on social media about lessons learned and growth, or whatever people post when they've made a series of terrible decisions and want to seem philosophical about it. But that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight, I was just going to enjoy my pad thai, my incredible view, and my drama-free existence. Some people never learn, but at least I had. 2 weeks after Sienna's surprise Singapore visit, she posted pictures with her yoga instructor Ryan. Caption, "The universe heals what's broken." I had to hand it to her. The woman could move on faster than a Ferrari in a school zone. Apparently, the universe healed her broken heart by providing another emotionally available man with flexible hours and presumably impressive downward dog form. The irony? Ryan was still emotionally close to his ex-girlfriend. Shocker, right? Sienna walked in on them mid-deep stretching session, which I'm pretty sure isn't an actual yoga term, but definitely sounds like a euphemism for something that requires significantly less flexibility than she was hoping for. Noah sent me the screenshots of her vague posting about trust issues and patterns repeating. I genuinely laughed out loud. But fate wasn't done serving up comedy gold. Blake got transferred to Singapore, and his company put him in my building. The same building. When he showed up in the lobby with a new girlfriend half his age, looking all surprised, I just smiled. "Bro, small world," he said, trying to play it cool. "Yeah," I replied. "Some of us just keep shrinking it." Months later, Sienna messaged, "I finally understand how you felt. I'm sorry." I left her on read. Then karma went professional. Turns out her stay-at-mom's tax dodge caught up. 3 years of back taxes, penalties, and interest. Roughly $22,000. Sophie, who worked in state revenue, accidentally reported her. Oops. I got promoted, extended my Singapore contract, and started dating Claire, a brilliant architect from Sydney who thinks poetry club is code for nonsense. She's right. When Sienna's final post said, "Sometimes love means letting go," I commented from my burner account. Exactly. That's why I let go first. Next stop, Bali getaway with Claire. No exes, no drama, just sunshine and silence. Blake still couldn't find closure, even in Singapore. His girlfriend dumped him in our building group chat after seeing Sophie's viral post. Everyone calls him Weekend Blake now. Elevator rides are entertaining. If Sienna ever reads this, your ex-husband and I are doing fine. He's still searching for emotional healing. I found mine at 30,000 feet, flying away from you.